Welcome everybody. I apologize for the delay in getting started, but we've got our technology bugs worked out, and we will go ahead and start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll go ahead and start. We have some great materials that have been prepared by people who've been working really, really hard to get us to this point, and I want to thank everybody. We'll let Carol kick us off this morning.
Good morning, commissioners. Yes, today is the first day of FY21 budget planning. And we have 3 days of hearings that are scheduled out for you. Today is the most intense one, and today is very much an information gathering day, so you're going to get a lot of information and see a few different people present. For those who are watching while we're streaming, it is on minnehahacounty.org/live that people can go through and watch it. We are not on channel 16, so therefore you can still watch it at our website. Department heads did receive this PowerPoint this morning, so they can follow along with us as we take and go through there. With that, I think we can go ahead and get started, Madam Chairman, unless there's any questions from anybody as we start.
Thank you. Vicki?
Good morning. I don't want to kick anybody out here. Good morning, Vicki Hewitt from the Auditor's Office. We're going to start us off with some May financial results.
He's just saying he can't hear.
Commissioner Barth, you cannot hear us?
I can now. She probably wasn't speaking, and I was afraid she was too far from the mic.
Okay. Well, keep us informed. We want to make sure you can hear.
All right, so we're going to begin with the general fund cash. We're at a healthy $23.6 million. If you recall, we did start ahead at the beginning of the year, a couple million due to the bank franchise tax coming in over budget, Board of Prisoners revenue, et cetera. So, and this is our high cash time of year, so pretty typical to be at that level. On to the highway fund cash reserves, $9.8 million. Revenues are on track. We're just seeing that seasonal spending in April and May. There was about $2.65 million spent on projects, so. And then on to revenues. The year-to-date total revenues are at 48.4% of budget, just slightly under last year. But again, dollar-wise, we're trending a couple million ahead. So total revenues at $30,775,000. Our year-to-date taxes are at 52% of budget at $24,266,000. So just slightly under last year again, but still at that 52% level. And then our other revenues at 38.3% of budget. So again, just under budget from last year, but about $1 million at over, so $6.5 million. And then we'll go into our expenses. Total expenditures at 38.6% of budget, $24,814,000. So just under last year as a percent of budget. With all the COVID-19 things going on, we're seeing that under budget and expenditures a little bit. For personnel, which again is 70% of our expense budget, we're at 39.9% of budget, so just a little over 1% under last year. And finally, our other expenses at 35.6%. So just under 3% under budget as compared to last year. and a couple $100,000 too, it looks like, so. Any questions on the May financials?
Yes, Commissioner Bendigo, sorry.
Vicki, have you got numbers that show us projects in progress at the end of last year that we carried over to this year that show those cash balances on what they could be? So that we can compare those this year to last year to show us what, frankly, our actual cash might be,
As far as,
both highway and general?
We can get those for this afternoon's session with carryover amounts for.
I think those are important to look at just from a comparative standpoint to make sure that we're using the correct cash balances, so to speak.
sure.
Any other questions? Vicki on revenue? Okay. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm going to reorganize my desktop a little bit here. So the next slide we have to review with you is a picture of our budgeted cash applied position over the last several years. And the graph before you shows the blue bar represents the actual budgeted cash applied level. So you can see it's ranged from 3.8 million in 2016 up to as high as almost 4.7 million in 2019. Our preliminary numbers for the 2021 projection are currently at 4.3 million. Remember again that this does not include any new hire positions, and it has our outside agencies budgeted at last year's budget amount. So there are additional requests from outside agencies that aren't built in here. The green bar represents the portion of that cash applied that is required by statute. It's 5% of budgeted appropriations. So we are not allowed to, we have to record a reserve of 5%, and that is part of the cash applied position. The third bar on the graph is what the actual change in the cash balance is over the years. So you can see in 3 of the past 4 years, we actually increased our cash applied position even with a budgeted cash applied of $4 million. The one statistic that I want to make note of, especially on this graph, is the percentage of cash applied. If you look at years 2016 through 2019, we were budgeting at 7.5% to 8% of our appropriations in cash applied. And we feel that that is a good target cash applied range that we could consider for this year's budget as well. And you'll be seeing that in some future graphics when we try to look at the overall picture for the 2021 projection. Any questions about that? Okay. If not,
Vicki, if I,
Sure.
Kim, I'm sorry, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Carson.
When you, going back to that screen, when you said the red bar, that's what we used in cash applied. That's actually what we put back into
That's
cash.
actually what we built we actually increased our cash reserve even when we had a budgeted cash deficit. And that's mainly because this required reserve of 5% is really not, we experience about 99%, a 99% collection rate on our tax revenues. So we don't come anywhere near that required reserve level.
When you said it, I just wanted to clarify for people listening that we didn't
Yes.
spend more than what we budgeted. We
That
actually
is
put money
correct.
in the bank.
We actually did. The only year we went negative in this particular time frame was in 2017. And if you recall, that's the year when we did a pretty significant investment in our ERP software. That was a $1.3 million impact, and that it was intentional. You'll see that we budgeted an 8% cash applied in that year, knowing that this was a one-time expenditure and we were planning to use cash reserves to help cash flow that project.
Kim, do you have any projections as to where you think we might end up in 2020?
We're trending pretty close to actual budget. So I would hope that we're going to end up positive in that $500,000 to $1 million range, which we've achieved in past years. Again, that's going to depend on bank franchise tax, but our Board of Prisoners revenue is trending very favorably, so that's going to help us considerably this year.
All right, thank you.
So the next slide is a history of our opt-outs. And as you recall, in 2019, this board passed an opt-out of $6.5 million, and of that opt-out, we used $1,750,000. The current budget projection includes that same opt-out level. So we have some opt-outs in the building fund, $1.4 million, and then we've budgeted $11,375,000 in the general fund as opt-out levy. We still have available for future use $4,750,000. So now we're going to look at a series of charts that show our projected revenue levels compared to the past 10 years of history. This first graph is kind of a 10,000-foot view of our revenues in the general fund. And you can see that our total revenues have grown from just over $44 million in 2012 to a projected revenue number of $65.7 million in 2021. And the main point to pull from this graphic is that our property taxes as a percentage of total revenue has increased from just under 67% to 74%. And that's true in 2020 and our projected 2021 revenue projections. All other revenue sources you can see have remained pretty static, minimal growth.
So the growth in the property taxes is not because Minnehaha County keeps increasing, but also because we've had growth in our community with building.
Exactly.
And so I think that's important for anyone who's listening. We're not continuing to increase your taxes. We've seen so much growth in Minnehaha County with new buildings and that this is continuing to rise, which is what
Correct.
we want to see.
Correct. And I have some additional graphs that will demonstrate that a little further.
Then it's correct to say that we're just becoming more and more dependent on those property taxes.
That's
Because
absolutely.
any other revenue sources that we have gotten are not keeping pace.
That's exactly right. That's correct. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the other categories of revenue a little more. The first being property taxes. As I said previously, property taxes are 74% of our revenue source, of our total revenue sources. And this graph shows the components of property tax. There are really two components. We have our base property tax levy, and then we have the opt-outs that we reviewed a couple slides back. And here what you can see is our property taxes have grown about $19 million over the past 10 years. About half of that came from growth in the community, as Cindy stated, growth of value, real estate values in the city, or in the county, excuse me. And the remaining $9 million came from opt-out levies. From 2020 to 2021's projection, we're seeing a $1.5 million increase, or about 3.2%.
Questions for Kim on any of that?
got another chart here. I'll move Jeff a little bit here. This chart just shows the raw numbers behind the graphic you just saw. And what this data demonstrates for you is how our dependence on opt-outs has grown over the past 10 years as well. Back in 2012, we were opting out for 7.29% of our taxes, and in 2021, we're going to be at 23.6%. Again, there are other components to our property taxes, and that are the CPI increases, which have ranged from a low in 2017 of 0% to a high back in 2013 of 3%. In 2020, we had 2.4%, and 2021 includes an allowance of 1.7%. Those are based on the CPI, and the Department of Revenue communicates with us on what our allowable CPI increase is each year. The other factor in our base taxes is growth, and this is where you see the growth in real estate values in the county. And that rate of increase ranged from 1.3% in 2013 to an estimated 2.65% for 2021. Now, this is a preliminary number, and we will be adjusting that over the course of the budget cycle between provisional and final budgets. So we may see a little variation in that number. But I'll back up. So the CPI adjustment amounted to almost $600,000 in 2021, and then we picked up another $934,000 in growth for a total increase in property taxes of $1.5 million. And again, we've left the opt-out amount at the same level as 2020.
So Kim, and just as we look ahead to 2022, I mean, likelihood is that CPI is not going to be setting any records.
Correct.
Except for
We would
maybe
anticipate
low
it to
levels
be
of-
very low.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Okay, so if there are no more questions about property tax, we'll look at some other charts now for some of our other sources of revenue. The second largest category we have in our general fund are charges for goods and services. And from 2020 to 2021, we're projecting an increase of $765,000. That's a 7.9% increase year to year. The biggest factor contributing to that increase is our Board of Prisoners revenue, where the Sheriff's Office has projected an increase of almost $840,000. That's assuming we will we'll fill 60 contract beds daily and an additional 20 with the U.S. Marshal Services. So we'll be housing 80 prisoners, or 80 inmates on average every day in 2021. Other factors that are part of this chart,
Kim?
this,
Okay, before we leave that one, can we just point out that these are our gross revenues, and they don't net out all the expenses that
correct.
get tied up
Correct.
with that.
And
so.
we'll be talking about those variables further on in the presentation.
All right, thank you.
The one thing that also is interesting here is if you look at the 2021 projection of 3.3 million, that mirrors pretty closely where we were at back in 2012 and 13. And then you'll see how that revenue source declined over time as we started, as the jail started filling with our own county inmates, and we no longer had the capacity to rent beds to other counties. A couple other more significant factors in this category of revenue are our courts fees. Those are, the current projection is down $100,000. In the sheriff's office, we're going to see a decline of $175,000, and that is associated with our detox contract. Those revenues will be shifted to the triage center starting in 2021. And lastly, our JDC revenues are going up about $175,000 for juvenile housing to other partner counties. A similar situation as we have in the jail where we house juveniles for other counties.
Commissioner Benega.
Kim, could you explain a little bit about the court fees, why that would be decreasing when we're seeing more and more court?
That's an area that I think we would need to follow up with Carl about, because we're seeing declining fees. We're also seeing when we look at another graph on fines and forfeitures, those numbers are declining over time too, and it does seem peculiar, given the volume of court activity that is occurring.
I think it would be nice to understand that a little better. And the other question I have is on the jail fees. If Lincoln County was to build a jail, what kind of an effect does that have on the revenue source for us?
That would, it would cut our revenue by about 75%.
Okay.
Pardon? But we do have a 5-year contract with
Right,
Lincoln
I
County
understand
as
that,
well.
but
Yep.
we're getting close.
Yeah, I mean, that contract just went into effect this fall. So we've got 4.5 years basically left.
That's right.
It would cut our, if I may,
Commissioner
it'd cut our
Christie.
revenue by 2.8 million or whatever that dollar amount is, but our expenses would also decrease.
Potentially, assuming our inmate population doesn't
Stayed the
displace
same,
that
yeah,
population.
yeah.
Correct. Oh, what happened?
But it wouldn't totally, because.
Wouldn't
you-
zero out.
Right, because you still gotta have staff in
There
order
is
to cover.
infrastructure
Yeah.
within those costs, yes. Okay, the next category of revenue we're gonna look at is intergovernmental revenue. And the largest source of intergovernmental revenue is our Air Guard contract, where we're staffing, we provide security for the Air Guard. Second, followed by our bank franchise tax, and the third major item there is our telecommunications tax. Our budget projections are pretty flat, 2020 to 2021, a 0.8% increase. You do see a large spike in our revenue in 2019. That was related to the bank franchise tax, but we're being pretty conservative on our revenue projection just because of the volatility of that revenue source and just the economic uncertainty right now.
If I might,
Commissioner Benega.
when do we know what that bank franchise tax is? Because they don't give us any reasonable estimates. They just send a check, as I
Right.
understand.
That is correct. We saw a 50% increase year over year from 2018 to 2019. We received that payment at the end of January, so we will get our 2020 bank franchise tax at the end of January 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Which is why we always budget conservatively up
Correct.
to that number, because it
Right.
just seems to be
It's
a
a big
crapshoot.
unknown. Okay, next slide. And this is miscellaneous revenue. It's just all of the other revenues that aren't part of the previous four categories. The biggest factor here, we're actually budgeting a 16% decrease from 2020 to 2021 here, and that's driven by our interest revenue. Well, we had some of our best revenue for interest income in 2019, but as you can see, 2020 rates are dropping. We did lower our budget a little bit for interest, and we've lowered it even more coming into this for 2021. The CD rates that we're getting have gone from about 2% down to 0.2% right now. So we're anticipating that we won't be earning a lot of money on our money. And then the last revenue slide we have are the fines and forfeitures in the courts. And again, we're budgeting a slight decline here as well, 315,000. And that's just based on where we were in 2019 and the trend we're seeing for 2020. And as Gerald brought up, we'll do some follow-up with the court system to try to get a better understanding of why those trends are declining the way they are. I misspoke. We have one more slide here on revenue. Licenses and permits. These are building permits make up the largest share of this revenue source. We're forecasting a decline of 10%, and that's just based on our 2019 activity and our 2020 trend. So that brings us then to our general fund expenditures, the other half of the equation here. And I'm going to move Jeff again. So what's depicted on this graph, there's a lot of numbers here, so bear with me. This is a graphic of all general fund expenditures. And it's broken down by function within the county, so breakdown between public safety, general government, legal services, health and welfare, judicial system, culture and recreation, and urban and economic development, and conservation and natural resources. What this graph will shows is that our expenditures started at a level of almost 42 million back in 2012. We're projecting total expenditures of 66.4 million in 2021. And our public safety costs have consistently run at 47% of our total expenses. General government, which is a category that would include services like the auditor's office, treasurer's office, Department of Equalization, those costs have declined slightly from 20% of our budget down to 18.6% of our budget projected in 2021. Legal services across those years are increasing from 13.3% in 2012 to a level of almost 17% in 2021. And then lastly, our health and welfare costs are also showing slight declines over that time period, starting at 12.5% in 2012 and declining to 9.9% in 2021.
Questions for Kim? We're all studying this graph.
There's a lot of numbers on that
Yeah.
graph.
My eyeballs are having trouble keeping the colors straight, so.
Here,
Mr. Hyberg.
maybe I can zoom in a little bit here.
Why would there be a decrease in the health and welfare, percentage-wise?
Well, I think it's because other expenditures are expanding, outpacing those costs. The actual costs are rising, but as a percentage of the total, they're declining. Mhm. That zooming doesn't really help all that much, but.
Not really.
Any other questions for Kim?
So now we've got a series of 4 slides here where we're gonna compare 2021's projections to our 2020 budget. And we've identified the key variables that are causing the increases and decreases in various categories. So first, we'll start with revenue. And again, our 2021 revenue projection is 65.7 million. That's up $2 million from 2020. a 3.3% increase. The key contributors to that increase are in property taxes, again, the growth rate of 2.65% and the CPI of 1.7%. That's about $1.5 million. We talked about Board of Prisoners revenue, $840,000 roughly. Juvenile housing revenue of $175,000. Detox revenue going away, being shifted to the triage center. We've got a decrease in invested interest. We've projected a lower attorney fees repaid. These are fees that are liened to clients of the public defender, public advocate office, courts clients. Our actual collections on those fees has declined, so we're projecting a lower rate for 2021. And then all other revenue changes net to a decline of about $97,000. So these are the biggest factors.
Commissioner Barth?
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I just have a question on that invested interest.
Yes.
I know that in the past we got revenue from the float in the treasurer's office. Is that where this invested interest comes from?
It is.
Or do we have other items that are gaining some interest?
No, this is the interest that's flowing from our cash reserves managed by the treasurer's office.
Okay, are we getting any revenue from the float in the treasurer's office? You know, they may have $20 million in the bank over the weekend. We may not be getting much, but I know that in the past we did get some.
We do see monthly interest revenue. I can get some specific numbers for you for this afternoon session if you want. But we do realize interest revenue monthly for that money that's on deposit or in reserve.
Is any of this have to do with the building money from the jail?
No, that is all captured in a separate fund in our capital projects fund. So this is truly just money earned on the cash generated by our normal county operations. Okay. All right, so now we're going to look at expenditures in two categories. First, salaries and benefits. Here's where we're going to see an increase from 2020 to 2021 of $755,000 for salaries and benefits. That's a 1.7% increase. And salaries and benefits do represent about 70% of our operating costs in the general fund. And here are the key contributors to that increase. You'll recall that in 2020, we had to budget a 27th pay period because we had 27 paydays occurring between January 1 and December 31st. The impact of that was almost $1.4 million. So there's some savings, if you will, associated with that. The next is the step increase for all staff. The cost of that is about $364,000. A 2% matrix adjustment has been built into the projection. That equates to $721,000. You'll also recall that there were a number of positions authorized in the 2020 budget that were mid-year hires or fourth quarter hires. The impact to annualize those positions is about $439,000 in 2021. And then we budgeted a 15% increase in our health insurance costs. That's $701,000. We've also got some reductions in the elections area. We'll have a decline in overtime and part-time dollars because we're entering a non-election year in 2021. There were also reductions in overtime primarily in the jail of $32,000. We've got some salary reimbursements from the highway department, and those are going up by almost $14,000. So we see the benefit of that in the general fund. And then our work comp insurance, we've budgeted a 5% increase on that. Yes.
You knew I was going to ask this. About the accrual of payroll, are you doing it by pay period or by day when you do accruals?
Right now, we do not accrue our payroll at all.
Right, but in
And
the future,
we would do it by day.
okay.
And I've got a graphic coming up that will try to help illustrate that.
Makes a big difference.
Okay? Any questions on salaries and benefits then? So our projection, again, does not include the impact of any requested positions at this time. This is just existing budgeted positions from 2020.
So it does include the almost $450,000 of positions when they get annualized.
That's correct.
Yep.
That's correct. Okay, so now we'll talk about all the other expenditures. We're projecting an increase in that category of expense of almost 1.4 million, or 6.7%. And these are all of the contributing factors that are causing that increase. Some of the larger ones I'll point out. Courts, we're projecting an increase of $319,000, almost $320,000, and that's a 15.5% increase over 2019. If you'll recall, 2019 ended up, 2019's actual expenses are actually higher than 2020's budgeted expenses by 4.7%. We do, right now, the way costs are trending, it appears as though we might actually finish the year at or below budget in courts, just because the spending in that area has been trending lower due to the COVID restrictions on the court activities. But we do feel that this $315,000 or $320,000 increase is going to be warranted in 2021.
Commissioner Heiberger?
And historically, for courts, we've been under budgeting and ending up at the end of the year
With a big
supplementing the
supplement.
account,
Mhm.
And so we're trying to get so that we run a more even budget going forward. And so
Exactly.
that's part of the reason you're seeing a huge increase too, again, for the public, so.
That's
Yeah,
very
I
true.
mean, and we may be trending down, but as the courts reopen this week and try to get through their backlog, we may not trend down by the end of the year either, so.
Okay. The next factor is the elections department. We're gonna see a $280,000 reduction in budget in 2021, again, because it's a non-election year. In facilities, we've got some increases for contract services and utilities. And then we'll jump down to the jail category. We've got a series of increases there. Inmate meals, an increase of $260,000. Our property liability insurance, we've got added insurance coverage for the jail addition of $22,000. There's some electronics maintenance that has a cost of $48,000. And then our armor contract for inmate health services, we're projecting an increase of $215,000. So if you recall, we have a budgeted increase in Board of Prisoners revenue of $840,000. The increase of, if we factor these increases in the jail, plus the portion of salaries and benefit increases attributable to the jail, that's $887,000. So we're about breaking even with that Board of Prisoners revenue. Okay. The next item on this list, it's got some asterisks by it. This is our armor contract for detox. We will not have that expense in 2021. It's going to be shifted to the triage center, but instead we will be making a $400,000 contribution to that joint project with the city. So that's pretty much a wash. And then you can see all the other items contributing.
Questions for Kim on that slide? It's a great slide. It's really helpful to break that all down, so
Good.
thank you.
So lastly, we've just got a summary here. And in summary, we said our revenues will be going up $2 million or 3.3%. Our expenditures are also increasing $2 million or 3.3%. Some notes to keep in mind. We've left our opt-out budgeted at the 2020 opt-out level. We've budgeted outside agencies at the 2020 amounts, no increases to those agencies. We've included a 2% matrix adjustment, a 15% insurance increase. We've kept all the equipment requests in this projection. They're built in already. Our new position requests are not built in yet, and the impact of a payroll accrual has not been built in yet to these numbers.
So we're in generally good shape, but we got a lot of work to do still. So,
That's right. So if there are no questions on that, these variables, 2020 versus 2021, I'd like to move on to a discussion regarding a payroll accrual.
everyone ready? Move on? Okay.
Okay. Last year, during the budget cycle, as you'll all recall, we were faced with the necessity to build in 27 pay periods. And that's because we were not really using a full accrual method to recognize our payroll expenses. We're recognizing expenses as of the payday they're paid out. And what we would like to consider going forward is that we adopt a full accrual method, which is going to require a one-time adjustment, if you will, to kind of reset the clock, to run our payroll, or recognize our payroll expense from January 1 to December 31 every year consistently. And then we'll never be faced again with a 27th pay period to include in a budget in future years. So this calendar is to kind of help demonstrate what we're proposing would be done to adopt that accrual method. So this is the December 2021 payroll calendar, and you can see we have paydays on December 2nd, December 16th, and December 30th. December 30th being the final payday of 2021. Now that payroll is only recognizing expenses for hours worked through December 24th. Okay? So that means the 7 days from the 25th to the 31st are going to fall into the first pay period of 2022, which will be on January 13th. So what we're proposing is that we adopt a full accrual method, which means we're going to have to recognize these additional expenses in the 2021 budget, the equivalent of 1/2 of a payroll, basically, 7 days of a 14-day pay period. The accrual impact of that, we're estimating to be about $750,000. And this would be a one-time countywide impact. This would be about $700,000 to the general fund and about $50,000 to the highway and other funds, 24/7 and emergency management. The benefit of doing this now is that if we look ahead to 2028, which would be the next time we'd see a 27 pay period budget, we're estimating that cost to be $1.9 million at that time. And that's assuming we're doing 2% matrix adjustments and filling probably 3 to 4 new positions every year at a cost of $250,000. So the cost increases significantly over time because of those factors. And also bear in mind that in 2028, that's going to fall right in the time period where some of our older opt-outs are going to start expiring. So that's also going to create some budgetary pressures in that time frame.
Commissioner Heiberger.
Just because I don't totally understand this. So those 7 days in that pay period, we will just budget for the amount in the prior year, and then you will move it into the next year's budget to pay for that payroll? Or you pay it out by the end of the year?
No, we'll just budget for it. It does, it still gets paid out on January 13th. We're literally just doing an accounting entry to record a liability at the end of the year. But the offset of that liability is an expense that has to be appropriated in 2021 so that we have adequate budget authorization to do that.
Thank you, that's what I understood.
And could you just explain again how that accrual for 2021 impacts 2028?
If we would take this step in 2021 and recognize this expense now, we would never see another 27th pay period impacting budget again. We would always be able to budget for 26 pay periods, and that would cover our 365 days of expense.
Not just once, but forever.
Forever, correct. So we're literally just resetting the clock from December 24th to December 31st when we do this, and then we'll never have to do it again.
Commissioner Karski.
I would say this is a very common way of accounting. I mean, more common to do it this way than the way we have
Yeah.
been doing it. It makes sense.
Absolutely, and this type of adjustment is a proposed audit adjustment every year in our annual audit. It's never been adopted, it's a recommended adjustment, and always has been identified as a recommendation by the auditors.
So to tie it back to the previous slide, this is one of the things that was excluded.
Correct.
That we would have to add in.
That's
So,
right.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Any other questions?
Jeff?
Commissioner Barth?
Yeah, so it's $750,000 in next year's budget added to our expenses, is that right?
That's correct. And we'll have some illustrations to look at when we get a little further on to help you see the impact of those.
Okay,
Thank you.
that was helpful as well.
Good.
Just to see it on a piece of paper with a calendar is helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, we're going to move on then to our means of finance. This is our preliminary means of finance for the 6 largest funds on our books. And the first column is our general fund. This includes the $65.7 million of projected revenue, the required 5% reserve on appropriations, which is $3.3 million, to come to a net means of finance of $62.3 million. Our projected expenses are $66.7 million, so our preliminary cash applied number is $4.3 million. And that's about 6.6% of budgeted appropriations. Just as another reminder, these numbers include the same opt-out level as 2020. Outside agencies are budgeted at 0 increase, 2% matrix adjustment, 15% insurance adjustment. Equipment requests are built in. We do not have new positions built in or the payroll accrual built in. Okay. Also to highlight some of the other funds in the highway fund, the proposed budget results in a cash applied number of $3.1 billion. And I've spoken with DJ about that. If you recall, our cash reserves in the highway fund are just under $10 million. But he has pointed out that there are a number of grant programs for bridge grants available in the state. He is anticipating that the county will be able to receive some grant funding for some of the projects that are built into this budget, but we don't budget for grants until we know that they are awarded. He's also got in his 5-year projection, 5-year cash flow, which he was going to share with me, and I can bring that forward so that you can see what he anticipates over the next 5 years, an estimate of where he feels the cash reserves will be in the highway fund. I want to jump over to capital projects. The proposed budget right now includes $20 million in capital projects for renovations in the admin building and extension building and a county highway shop.
Commissioner, sorry, Carol.
Do you just want to explain how that 20 million is going to impact the bottom line when we say what the budget for FY '21 is then? Because we have that with the jail. If we have a budget of 95 million, typically there's an additional 20 million.
Right.
Can you just explain that?
Our all-in budget proposed for 2020 is actually about $117 million. And that's, again, that's, as Carol stated, 20 million of that is for these special projects. Our typical budget level would be at about $95 to $97 million.
And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more later. So, but I mean, there's a lot that goes into that particular item about that $20 million in bonds. So I can hold the questions until we get to that later slide.
Okay. All right. So we're to the end here. Our last slide for this segment of our meeting, our hearing, is includes some illustrations that show you the impact to adopting certain of these budget requests that have not been included in the numbers you've seen so far. So on this slide, we've got three different illustrations, basically. We have, at the top of the slide, we're showing where our current projected revenues and expenses result in a preliminary cash applied number of $4,373,000. And that's true in all three of these illustrations. We know that we've got requests for new positions that equate to a cost of $400,000. The cost to adopt the accrual method of accounting for payroll would be $750,000, and outside agencies have requested an additional $352,000. So if all of those requests were to be approved, that would add $1.5 million to our expenditures. It would increase our 5% reserve by $75,000, and it would result in a cash applied number of $5,459,000. Excuse me, I misstated that. The $5,459,000 is the cash applied if we establish 8% as our recommended cash applied figure. And so the increase in expenses that are included in this illustration would put us over that cash applied position by almost $500,000.
And can you explain where you come up with the 8%?
Again, that relates back to the graphic we showed of cash applied early on, where in years 2016 through 19, we budgeted at cash applied levels of 7.5% to 8%, and we still built our cash reserve still increased in those years. So we're recommending that we could budget to a level of 8% and still be able to build our cash year to year.
Thank you.
So now in illustration 1, we've changed up some of the requests. Illustration 1 assumes that 1/2 of the requests for new positions would be filled. That's true in illustration 1 and 2. We would still recommend that we adopt that accrual for payroll. Illustration 1 assumes that 1/2 of the increases to outside agencies be granted. Illustration 2 reflects that we would actually decrease our outside agency funding, and that ties back to one specific request, which we'll be getting to this afternoon. And then illustration 1 also assumes that we would fund only the vehicles for the sheriff's office and not grant the requests for equipment in some of the other offices, which those are, again, something we'll review this afternoon. And in both of those scenarios, an 8% cash applied is still in that $5.4 million range. In illustration 1, we'd be $54,000 too high. And in illustration 2, we would still have $95,000 available to grant additional requests at that reserve level.
So I'm wondering if an argument can be made that we could exist at a slightly higher cash reserve level, maybe slightly higher than 8%, when we know that we're funding a non-cash accrual
For payroll?
Am I off base there?
No, no,
Okay.
that's very true.
Okay, thank you.
Because again, that payroll accrual, it's not that we're not spending any more money than we normally would. It's just that we're gonna recognize some of that expense 7 days earlier than we would have under our old method of accounting.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but 1% is 600,000, roughly. 1% additional cash applied is 600,000. Tie a dollar number to the percentage.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it's based on that appropriations number of 66 million.
6 million. Okay.
All right, any questions? Commissioner Benega?
Well, at this point, I'm just gonna say that you're only half right in your conversation, in my judgment, because you're not expending that in cash, but you're recording the expense in the proper year that you had it. But 2 days later, you're gonna start with a $750,000 decrease in cash for next fiscal year.
Cash?
Yes, because you're paying that payroll on the
Okay,
31st.
I see what you're saying.
Which is what we would have done if we don't do this accrual.
Right. And in my little bit of experience, I guess, but the issue of accruals is usually done on a monthly basis, and for whatever reason, this is gonna do it on an annual basis, but even doing it once a year is the right thing to do, but it would be more accurate if we did it on a monthly basis, so we knew exactly where we were each time we get reports.
And we do have the ability to do that in our accounting system, so we could do it monthly.
It would seem to me that, in my preference, that we would see it that way rather than on an annual basis, because 7 or 8 days of a working payroll amounts to a lot of money when it's 70% of your pay or your
Right.
budget.
The only implication of that is that we wouldn't be able to close the monthly, we wouldn't be able to close the month as soon because we'd have to wait for that first pay period the following month to run so that we could post that accrual.
You can do it that way, but you can also do it with an assumption that each payroll period will cost you X amount of dollars, and you make that assumption rather than doing the actual, and so you could close right away.
Okay?
Any other questions? I see a couple perplexed looks, but. Commissioner Carson.
Illustration 2, we would be funding all the equipment requests or none of them?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them. Illustration 1 is the only scenario where we would not grant all the equipment requests. And again, we'll come back to this after you've had time to see the other requests, hear from department heads about their new positions. This is just to give you a graphic of what the impact would be on some of these decisions.
The last question I have for now is on the recommended cash applied number that you've given us. Do we know exactly where we're at with property tax payments at this point? Are we close to 100%, or are we at 95?
We're at, through the end of May, we're at 52%.
So in theory, we're at 104 if we
Right, we're
continue.
over what was actually due
Okay,
on May 1st.
thank you.
But we're also lagging about 1% from where we were last year at this
Correct.
time.
But if you look back 5 years, we're about dead even really for the average collection rate at this point in the year.
Okay. I don't know if this is the right time to talk about this, but in assumption two, you talked about reducing IBC housing due to per diem billing. Did you
Right.
talk about that and I
Well,
missed it?
that's actually this adjustment in outside agencies,
Oh, that you were talking about,
right?
okay.
Yeah, and we'll go over that when we talk about outside agencies.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Thank you so much. So we're running just slightly behind schedule. But we'll just push our break back and shorten our lunch probably is how I would see us catching back up, or maybe we'll catch up otherwise. But Carrie Deaver's next.
You wanna set it to slideshow? How do I not see where it is? Pardon? Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
I get to talk about the personnel side of this, and you'll recall that the vast majority of our staff are on our pay matrix, and then we have some select individuals who are paid a flat rate. So this portion of the discussion is really about those individuals who are paid on the matrix. And each year we look at the matrix and determine, in order to be competitive with the market, how much we should increase that by. And there are 4 factors that we look at. We look at the consumer price index. We also look at the employment cost index, which is slightly different. That looks at the increased cost for salary and wages. We also look at data about what we're seeing from surveys on what average salary structure increases are. And then we also look at our comparable agencies. So that bottom box is matrix increases for some of our comp entities, which you remember is what we compared to during our comp studies. Under the CPI, you see that I'm still giving you, 4 different data points. That's because CPI, when you hear us talk about CPI, it's never the same. The national CPI is CPI-U. I'm also giving you the Midwest figures. Every year, South Dakota State adjusts their minimum wage, which of course impacts our salary structure as well and being competitive. So you have a figure for CPI on the South Dakota State. And that MC budget, it actually refers to the figure that we're given by the Department of Revenue for increasing our own budget figures. So as Kim had mentioned, that was 2.4 going into 2020. The South Dakota State minimum wage adjustment going into 2020 was 1.7. Of course, we don't have a year end for our national and Midwest, but what you'll see there is April has significantly lowered, and that is because of where we're at in our economy. Overall, what I would say here is you probably see that we gave a 3% increase coming into 2020. We never know what our other comparable organizations are necessarily doing because they're going through budget process at the same time that we are. On average, they gave a 2.28 coming into 2020. But you'll see that we've been trending a little bit behind those other organizations for a couple of years, and we recognize that. So we looked at a larger increase for 2020. Kim has mentioned to you that we put in a 2% matrix adjustment for next year. That's close to trend, but it is also what's contractually obligated for our unions for 2021. Any questions on that data? Okay. The other portion of our salary increases pertain to the salaries that you want to provide to elected officials. You probably remember for elected officials that we look at, again, we look at market data, we look at comparisons to their deputies, and we look at equity amongst our other department heads. Base salaries are set by resolution each year in December. This is the data that you're looking at right now compares what the rates of pay are for 2020 in this column. And then I'm giving you, oh, Jeff, I don't want to lose you. I'm giving you some comparable organization data for this. Again, I stress this every year. The tricky thing to remember is you're looking at 2020 comparisons. So all these organizations, of course, are going through the same process, and those wages will go up. What makes elected officials also a little bit more complicated is some entities pay based on a salary matrix or a pay grade system, like we have the rest of our staff, and others pay flat rates. So these numbers can sometimes fluctuate. But what you're seeing here is the average salary for our comparable organizations for what they pay these positions. If they have a pay range, this is the base and this is the maximum. And you can see on average our comparable entities are paying treasurers and register of deeds a flat rate. And so this column is the average or the midpoint for those organizations. The last two columns are the comparison of where we expect the chief deputy or assistant department head to be at the end of this year. So that's before any salary adjustments are applied for general staff as well. For the figures that you're looking at for the budget, there's been nothing built in yet for elected officials, so that's one other thing to consider. The next slide gives you just that department breakdown and equity. Again, what I'm giving you is an idea of what staff size they have, how long they've been in their role as a department head. For those staff that are paid on a pay grade step system, where they'll be right before they go into next year, and then what that translates to for salary. Any questions on pay matrix or elected officials before we talk about health insurance premiums?
Questions? All right, looks like you get to move on. Thank you.
All right. So for health insurance premiums, you've heard Kim mention a couple of times that we've built in a 15% increase for 2021. I'm going to try and give you a sense with the next couple of slides of why we made that decision and why we're recommending that you budget at that level. You've heard me talk over the last couple of years that we've experienced a pretty significant increase in our costs for the health insurance. This chart gives you an overview of what that looks like. So this is, the first column shows you how much we've had in reserve at the year end for the past 6 years. This gives you a sense of what the total cost of operating our health and dental insurance was after any stop loss reimbursements were received. And you'll remember here, stop loss reimbursement wasn't really an issue, but this is where we started to experience significant claims increase and started receiving some stop loss reimbursements because of those claim costs. This next column gives you a sense of the increase in our plan costs over the previous year. And I think most of us remember that we had several good years where we weren't increasing our health insurance premiums. In fact, we were able to offer premium holidays periodically. Our plan costs were pretty flat. And then we hit this anomaly in 2017 where we experienced a 21% increase. And we had hoped that that would correct and go back down. But in the next 2 years, we still experienced, 13% increases overall. So no premium holidays during that time period. In addition, our reserve balance has gone down quite significantly. You'll remember that we've had reserve analyses conducted. We're at an okay level. We're comfortable with that. But still cognizant that we have been basically operating at a loss for a couple of years. So we had a 15% increase coming into 2020, and I'm recommending a 15% increase for 2021 as well. This is sort of the annual overview. The next slide really kind of tries to give you an example of what this really looks like on a month-to-month basis. So, and again, it's really hard to stand here in June and say this is what I anticipate we're going to need for next year because we're only a few months into the new year. But on average, right now, we're trending around $312,000 in health claim costs, just health medical costs for 2020. And our prescription claims are trending on average around $136,000. Our dental claims have really gone down because, of course, nobody's going to the dentist right now. So the reason this figure is grayed out is I'm using an average from 2019 instead. Admin fees, stop loss, and premiums are charged per employee per month, so those do fluctuate, but on average, we're having about $20,000 that we pay for admin fees each month, almost $100,000 a month for stop loss insurance premiums. So on average, and again, this is just an illustration, but it costs around $600,000 a month to operate the health plan. And we're bringing in $584,000 right now in premiums. This, of course, fluctuates as well as people come on and off our plan, but right now it looks as though we're underfunded by about 3%. And I'm not concerned about that because this figure can change month to month. But when you look at where we're at over an annualized basis, it's important to consider. So if I were going to project into 2021, and I considered that we maybe still experienced about 12% increases in claims, we know that we'll have administrative fee increases for next year. Stop loss insurance and premiums have been a major driver over the last couple years. If I projected out expected expenditures for 21 based on that, we'll definitely need the 15% increase. It would be great if we had a really good year and I could recommend lower by the time we get to October, November, but right now I really feel 15% is prudent.
Any questions for Carrie on this? I know Carrie follows this, tracks this very closely, loses a little sleep over it occasionally. And, you know, kind of just for the public, I mean, we're self-insured, but really what that means is we insure the top part of the risk, and then we purchase insurance. That's what the stop loss premiums are. So we purchase insurance for the larger claims, and so that's how this all comes together. So, thank you.
The last part,
If I
go
could-
ahead, Mr. Karski.
The stop loss, they basically, are we gonna be renegotiating that? Because last year they had some provisions in there where they could not target certain people, that type of thing. Are we gonna, do you see negotiations happening on that to reduce our?
They did laser quite a few individuals, so we pick up
Laser,
a larger
that's- yeah, thank
portion
you.
of the amount. And we have a specific stop loss rate of 100,000, meaning we pick up the first $100,000 in claims, and we do have several people who are lasered higher. Do I think we're going to renegotiate? Absolutely, because our contract comes due each year. But we had a rate cap coming into 2020, and we hit that rate cap. So while I think that we're going to be renegotiating, I don't expect that. I still think we're going to be seeing an increase.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the last portion I have for you is really to break down what the staffing requests are that you have as you're looking at 2021. And this year we've added a new chart so that we can more accurately keep front of mind any grant positions that we have out there. And you remember that we approve grants, or the commission approves grants, and if they're funded, sometimes that'll result in new positions, and often with that, the grant might have something along the lines of saying it's only for 3 years or it's only for 2 years, and that all depends, of course, on the grant and the situation. Right now, in the payroll budget, there are 5 grant-funded positions. The sheriff's office is requesting and unfortunately, all of them happen to end in 2020. So this is all of them, but they all end in 2020. The sheriff's office knows that there are 2 positions, the corporal position here and a deputy sheriff. The grant funding will definitely end at 2020, and they're asking for approval to continue those positions. So about $147,000 to $148,000 for those 2 positions. Pre-trial has a grant-funded position. Human Services has a caseworker for their Alliance program. And then we have that new juvenile diversion coordinator that was just approved last year. All the funding is expected to end at 2020. The difference with those is that there's potential that those grant funds, we may be alerted later in the year, or hope that we find out later in the year that the grant funding for those will continue into 2021. All of these positions are currently built into the budget. The next slides really talk about positions that are not currently included in the payroll budget for 2021. And you might recall that we have a lot of different kinds of requests. Some people will come in with full year requests, some come in with half year requests. We have staffing changes for reclassifications. So we're breaking this out into two main sections. New positions for full years, which is the yellow, and then the slide after that will be other types of position requests. And you're looking at only a request for 6 full-time positions for the full year. You have a request from the auditor's office for a senior elections technician. From the public defender, you have a request for a deputy or senior deputy public defender and a paralegal. The sheriff's office jail division is requesting a correctional systems operator. The state's attorney's office is requesting a legal office assistant, and the treasurer's office is requesting a tax and license technician. The total cost for all those positions, if you were to approve them, are slightly under $400,000 or $385,000. The next slide explains the difference between this figure and the $400,000 that Kim has been showing you, because you have about $15,000 in additional staffing requests. This year, we talked about the cost for those positions that had only been funded for part of 2020. This year, you don't have any mid-year requests. These are all simply reclassification requests where the departments are asking to take an existing FTE, reclassify it to a higher level position, and recruit and promote somebody. So the cost here is the promotional cost. So you're looking at about $15,000 for reclass requests, one in the sheriff's office for a deputy sheriff to a sergeant, one in the public defender for a senior deputy public defender to a senior trial attorney, and one to reclassify a paralegal position to a new classification of paralegal supervisor. And the 17 has a question mark after it because that's a new position. We would want to go through and actually do the review on that. But we're confident that regardless if that came out to a 17 or an 18, the promotional cost would be around $3,000. The last slide I have for you, these slides continue to get a little bit longer each year, maybe harder to read, so I broke out the section that gave you a comparison to the number of positions that have been approved for those departments in the past, both growth since 2011 and then also growth from 2016. And the comments columns gives you a sense of where those position growth has, or where that position growth has been at. And this is only for those departments that have requested new positions for the year.
Commissioner Heiberger.
One question. So when we're looking at new positions in that second option that Kim put forward, there was, I believe, $200,000 in it. Does that, and it talked about new positions, but does that include deciding on the promotions too? So those two sheets go together, so we can come up with $200,000 between those two sheets. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Carrie? All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So it is 10:28. Why don't, we had a 10-minute break scheduled. Why don't we go ahead and let's try to start to get back closer to on schedule at about 10:35. Does that give you guys enough time? Run down the hallway. So we're going to take a 6 or 7 minute break, everyone. Thank you.
believe, is how we're doing on this one. So, there we go. The equipment requests that we have, Equalization has requested a vehicle to replace a 2003 Chevy truck, would be a cost of $25,000. Human Services is looking for a used transport vehicle at $15,000. The jail, Ford Explorer to replace a transport vehicle at $33,759. The sheriff has 2 Dodge Durangos for investigators in there, 5 patrol SUVs, and then additional vehicle equipment of $20,250 because they have to put lights and stickers and all this other kind of stuff that goes into a vehicle. So our general fund requests for our vehicles are $318,009. We then have Highway, who has requested a new vehicle for admin staff and SUV, a pickup road crew. The big items are 2 tandem trucks, that would be a total of $294,000, 1 loader at $250,000, and a crash, and I don't know what that is, I didn't ask DJ that, some kind of a crash trailer at $38,000 for a total of $852,000. So, and if you look within each of their departments, you will see narratives that address that and talk about why they need to have something replaced and what they're doing with that. Any questions at all on vehicles?
Any questions?
I'll just,
Commissioner
just a
Heiberger.
comment, that there were, on the highway, they were missing some of their reports on maintenance schedules, and I did email them out, and I see there's a response from DJ, so I haven't had a chance to read that response, but just to know that that's probably coming, because they're not in his reports.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next one is the outside agencies. You've heard Kim reference this a couple different times. I want to make a few highlights as we go through. Mandated by statute is Southeastern Behavioral Health that we pay $1 per capita. So that would be $169,468. And Kim did go back and look as to when that number changed per the last census, and it was 2012. So we anticipate in 2022 that number will change. We do have contracts for a variety of things, or dues. Animal control, the Humane Society takes care of strays and animals and those issues that are outside of the city limits. CCOG dues that we pay, we estimate a little over $25,000, almost $26,000. The other thing I'll point out is the Sioux Empire Fair Association. You have a contract with a group to provide management of that, and you provide a financial support to them along with having them in the building fund, which we'll talk about in a couple more slides. But the Sioux Empire Fair Association has requested $250,000. You've been holding the last 3 years at $150,000. Now I want to talk briefly about that IVC housing with the Carroll Institute, because that number's changed quite a bit and why that fluctuates. If you go back to the year when Detox was having issues, it was when I first got involved, along with the fact that we were in danger of accreditation issues that were out there. One of the things that I give a ton of credit to this commission, Ken McFarland, my predecessor, and Carroll Institute came together rather quickly, put together a contract so that people who were on IVC holds, but no bed was ready for them for treatment, were able to do that. That contract started out at $220,000 a year. And about 3 or 4 years into that, we dropped it to $110,000 because of things starting to, we weren't using as many beds of a guarantee date. After that, sometime in 2018, for 2019, we changed that to $55,000, dropped that again. So we would have a guaranteed number of beds that were there, but again, we were not using them all. So in 2019, Carroll Institute very graciously agreed to work with us as a per diem, and that is where we're at so far, and I think we've only used it once this year. Does that sound about right? With the bill, I know when the billing came up, we all had to stop and think about process for just a minute, because it was a little bit different than what we would be doing. So that is the reduction that you've been seeing on there. Now, Carroll Institute did submit a request for a general fund support of, I believe, $6,000. So that dollar amount you do see in there. that IVC housing triage really takes care of that. And again, we haven't been using it. And I give credit to the detox staff that is working really well with the state of South Dakota. And they've been doing a great job in getting things placed, getting people placed, and things not having to wait quite so long. So we're excited to have that happen. The donation list on there is financial support, a subsidy that you do for a variety of organizations. The other one that's new is Southeastern Behavioral Healthcare Mental Health Court. That is a $5,000 request. Southeastern has been participating in the drug courts at no cost, and for several years they've been doing that. And they've said, you know what, it would really be helpful to us, Minnehaha County, if you would help reimburse us for our staff time that goes into that. Hence a request for $5,000. I will point out the Domestic Abuse Fund. Those are dollars that are funded with marriage fees and divorce fees that are collected, and it really comes down to a percentage split. What you've been using the past few years is 40% for Children's Inn, 40% for Family Visitation Center, and 20% to LSS Family Violence Project, which used to be the money that went to the Rape and Domestic Violence Center.
Compass Center.
Compass Center, thank you. They've changed their names, and I can take you all the way back to Citizens Against Rape and Domestic Violence when their name was that. So that's the dollar split that goes there. And all we've done with LSS is just switch that over from the Compass Center. And then ambulances we'll talk about later on today. Any questions at all?
Commissioner Heiberger?
So the LSS one, they have that family violence project up at the top too, so they're asking for not only the 20% split, but an additional funding on top of that? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Karski?
Why the big jump to the Conservation District
They've asked for that every year.
They asked for it.
Every
from
year.
2,000 to 20,000?
But they've asked for it for every year.
Okay. And I guess, I've been on the Makita board for a while, and I know that Lincoln County pays more to that board than Minnehaha County does. I think we should be, and it's not a lot. It would mean an increase of $2,000 to Makita, or to that board for our belonging to there. And I'd encourage us to consider an increase there. Yeah, so not a
Madam
significant
Chair,
amount.
Jeff.
Commissioner Barth?
So being on that board these days on the Conservation District, I know that in past years, we did give considerably more, and I would say that was probably 2010 or 12 that we cut them back. And I think 2000 actually was an increase from zero that we gave them for a year or two. And maybe the auditor's office could look up our budget from 2010 and see what we gave. But I think they're just trying to get back to where they were. Not that they have to be, but that's, I think, why they're asking for an increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Heiberger?
I have an old paper here from Ken, and the soil conservation in the year 2000 got 30,000 from us.
Okay.
Chairman? I will also add that per state statute, the Minnehaha County State's Attorney's Office does provide legal services for the Conservation District. So if they've got something that they need to deal with, our civil attorneys have helped them out.
Thank you. Any other questions on this particular slide? All right, thank you.
We're going to turn over to Kim, and I think she'll probably turn over to Mark at some point.
So next, we're gonna take a look at our outstanding debt and our building fund. So this first graphic you're looking at is a schedule beginning in 2020 out into the future to 2037, showing what our debt level is with our existing bond issues. We currently are servicing debt out of two funds, one being the building fund and the other being the bond redemption fund. The bond redemption fund is basically an opt-out form of levy to service that debt. The debt in the building fund is just being paid by the existing property tax levy in place for our building fund. So in 2020, you can see the two categories of debt. The green bar represents those bond issues that are serviced in the bond redemption fund, and the orange bars are those bond issues serviced by the building fund. So in 2020, you can see there's about an equal share of debt in those two funds, just at 2.8 million in the debt in the bond redemption fund and about 3 million in the building fund. In 2021, you see some pretty, or for a total debt level, again, I'm gonna move Jeff. So there's a total debt level for the county of almost 5.9 million in 2020. In 2021, that debt service, I'm sorry, I misstated that. That's the total debt service, not the total debt level. We'll see that in the next slide. So our total debt service in 2020 is about 5.9 million. In 2021, that number is going to decline to 4.8 million. And we're gonna see an increase in the bond redemption fund. That's tied to our jail expansion bond series, where we're going from paying interest only in 2020 to we'll begin our principal payments on that debt in 2021. In the building fund, you'll see a significant decline, about $2.8 million. And that relates to two issues for the courthouse and CCC bonds. Those are being paid off by the building fund in 2020. And therefore, the ongoing debt service in the building fund declines to just under $250,000 a year. The next points at which our debt payments will change, they're all decreases, will be in 2026. Our debt payments will go down about $200,000, and that's because we'll pay off the bond for the Health and Human Services building, and that is in the building fund as well, so that's where you see this little orange bar disappears. And then in 2028, the courthouse addition that was in the bond fund, that will be paid off. That will decrease our debt by about $900,000. And then in 2031, the jail kitchen will be paid off in the bond fund. And so from 2031 through 2037, the only debt outstanding will be that for the jail expansion.
Any questions before we move to the next slide, which kind of dovetails with this slide a little bit?
Okay. So, as you recall, we had an outside committee, a facilities task force, that came in and took a look at our facility needs. And as this next graphic comes from the report that they helped prepare for this board, and it illustrates for you what the bonding capacity would be in the building fund, and what without having any impact to our tax levy in the building fund. As you recall from the previous graph, our bond payments are going to go down by 2.8 million between this year and 2021. And so that frees up some cash in the building fund to take on some additional projects and address our capital needs. So this graph is giving you presenting for you three different scenarios of borrowing. The first being $10 million, the second $20 million, $30 million, and $40 million. And in all three examples, the green bars in the front are our existing debt, just under about $226,000. The blue bar would be the additional debt payments that would be assumed if we did these various levels of bonding. So if we borrowed $10 million, our payments would be $676,500. If we borrowed $40 million, our payments would be $2.7 million. And then all varying degrees of borrowing. Then the very last bar represents cash that would be available to do cash projects, just to pay cash as we go to do various capital projects. So if, with an additional $10 million of borrowing, there would be $3.6 million available annually in the building fund to do projects. Conversely, if $40 million were borrowed, we'd have only $1.6 million available annually to do cash projects. Historically, our cash projects have run about $1.5 million a year. So again, at any of these borrowing levels, we would not be impacting the building levy at all. The building levy would stay where it's at.
Commissioner Karski.
In other words, taxes won't change.
That's correct. They'll change for growth in CPI, but not because of capital projects.
Yep.
Questions? This was a good reminder for me because I had seen this slide back when we worked on this, and then it's hard for me to keep in my head. And so I appreciated the reminder.
Sure. So if there are no questions on this, that's going to lead us into a discussion on for our building fund budget. And Mark is going to go over the proposed project list we have for the building fund in 2021, excuse me.
Morning.
Morning.
So, building fund list, same list. I went over here a couple weeks ago in my presentation. Majority of these projects are annual, upkeep, building and grounds maintenance. A few larger scale projects in here. $300,000 added in for administration remodel, FF&E. $345,000 for courthouse fire alarm panel. The parts for that panel are becoming obsolete. It's 25 years old, so we're looking at getting that replaced. We had some anticipated increases in the geo repairs and maintenance. We moved that up to 200,000. It's additional 100,000 square feet, so we're anticipating increased maintenance and service. And then 500,000 for the JDC Sallyport construction. So we put that in there as a placeholder. If that project gets approved, that'll be paid for cash out of the building fund. Are there any questions for me?
Any questions for Mark? I know we had a chance to look at this not too long ago with him. Commissioner Heiberger.
I have one question. So if I'm going back to the slide prior to that, so if we ended up doing the $20 million bond, we would have cash available of almost $3 million, and expenditures expected for the cash out of as 2.4. What is that remaining balance? I mean, because I'm assuming it's not just going to be $600,000, or is it? So is there a bottom line? Is this what we can spend and we still have money left in the building fund?
Yes, and this next slide will demonstrate that.
Okay.
All right, go to the next slide then.
Yes, one other thing we do want to mention, looking at this, we've got the current year project list, but we also have a 3-year outlook. And if you notice in 2022, we're looking at significant expenditures in that year as well, $3.4 million. And that assumes a capital contribution to Metro for the new, it would go towards the training center that Metro would tentatively move to. That again is a preliminary number because as design work is currently underway to determine the costs of that facility. All right, so I'm going to advance to the next slide and then you can see the answer to Cindy's question. So this slide shows you where we're projecting our cash levels to be and what our budget assumption, and it also summarizes our budget assumptions for 2021. So let's focus just on the budget column first of all. So we're projecting revenues in the building fund of $4.5 million. That includes the growth in CPI increase in the building fund at the same rates we budgeted in the general fund. Then down in expenditures, let me turn my pointer on here. You'll see the $2.4 million in cash projects. That's the list that Mark just reviewed with you. Then we've built in a debt payment of $1,350,000 that assumes a new bond issue of $20 million to address other capital needs. Then we'll have principal and interest on our existing debt and just some administrative fees, trust administrative fees for that debt. So we would project total expenses of $3.9 million, almost $4 million, and a budgeted surplus of $546,000. We're estimating we will end 2020 with about $2 million in the building fund, bringing us to an ending cash balance in the building fund of $2.6 million. Then looking ahead into 2022, revenues are built into this with a 3% increase that approximates what we are seeing for 2021. That may be a little aggressive depending on what CPI is, but it's going to be within $100,000 probably of. But here's where we see that the larger cash project number, which includes $2 million for Metro, that $3.4 million. We've got the debt service on a $20 million bond, and then the other debt payments and administrative fees. So we're projecting a deficit in 2022, which will result in an ending cash balance of about $2.2 million. Then looking ahead, you'll see that our cash balance is projected to increase in 2023 and 4 to levels of 3.7 million and 5.8 million.
Questions about that?
If I could make just a
Commissioner
comment.
Karski.
The new bond issue at 20 million, I mean, right now, we're projecting 10 to 30 or whatever. We really don't know until we're done with all the projects we have going on, figuring out what it's gonna be. It could be 18 million, it could be 23 million, so.
Correct.
Just as a caution, don't, I hope nobody's thinking that 20 million is the magic number. It could be more, it could be less, so we just kinda, but I think it's important when you look at our ending cash in our building fund that we be prudent and we actually bond for capital projects that have a 20-year minimum life cycle that we can extend out, and it makes sense to bond for those things and pay cash for the shorter term stuff. So we will have in our ending cash probably more, in my estimation, than what we really need to carry over. But when you look at almost $6 million in just 4 years, so.
Well, yeah, by the time we get to 2024, the next couple years are a little
Yeah,
tighter.
even next year, though, we'll have more than we have this year. And in 2022, we'll have more than we have in 2020. So, I mean, it's a robust fund in my mind.
It is a positive outlook. However, keep in mind that there are some crowding issues in the courthouse that will probably need to be addressed in the short term, 3 to 5 year time span. So fortunately, it looks like we will have cash availability to be able to address some of those issues too.
Yeah, to be able to leverage the cash available possibly through bonding so that we have cash for those projects.
Right.
Other questions? We haven't talked a lot about it, but, we are at least in a favorable market for us to be able to bond and get debt, and we'll be having more conversations about that, so. It's the good side to the fact that we only get 0.2 on our CDs right now, so.
Right. Okay. So if there are not any other questions about building fund,
Any other questions? Commissioner Benega? See a question brewing on your face.
Yeah, it is. Where did Chiller where did that end up at?
that's included in the $20 million project list.
Okay.
For
I don't see
bonding.
that identified
Correct.
specifically.
Yes,
But that was in the building committee prior.
yes.
But it's a long-term expense. I mean, that would be something that we've certainly gotten a lot of life out of what we have right now, a lot of years of life. Any other questions? Okay. I appreciate you shaking your head, Commissioner Barth. That helps me out, so thank you. All right, next slide then.
All right. The last slide has to do with insurance coverage. There has been some discussion about increasing our liability limits. We currently carry $1 million liability limits, and we did get some estimates from South Dakota Public Assurance Alliance to increase those limits. Costs associated with a $2 million limit would increase our premiums $33,000, and going to $3 million would increase our premiums $55,000 roughly. We did we chose the middle of the range increase of $2 million, and we built that into the projections that you've seen today. But that is a consideration for you for a budget adjustment if you so choose. The other insurance consideration is that we're anticipating an increase in our building insurance premiums following the fire claim that we settled on in 2020. Our building insurance premiums total $140,000 countywide. A 20% increase equates to $28,000. We are still working with our agent to try to determine what the most realistic impact would be, but we do think we will need to make some sort of budget adjustment for that.
Commissioner Karski.
Earlier, I saw where the jail expansion increased our premium by 22,000. Adding that on, is that 22 part of this 28, or that's, so, because we're gonna be getting rid of one structure, assuming, and then adding
Yes, that adjustment is strictly to add the new building onto the policy at the current rate.
28,000 doesn't even factor in that additional building then? Or
It does.
It does?
It does.
Okay.
The 28,000 includes the increase that we are seeing in 2020 for the new jail addition?
The jail budget includes coverage for the jail addition at today's rates. The 28,000 is an increase over and above today's rates. That would include the jail addition.
Okay, but it's new money.
It's new money.
Yeah. Good questions.
Okay.
Anything else on that?
Okay.
So that takes us to a presentation on Metro 911. We have Scott here, is that correct? Yep, thank you for being patient. We're running just a little behind, but we did make up some time. Carol, before you run out, do we have any slides for Scott? But it's not on Dropbox? No. Okay, that's what I just want to make sure. Thank you. While Scott's working on that, I can tell the other commissioners that I had texted DJ about the highway attenuator, whatever, however you say that word. And I have a picture of it if anybody wants to see it, but it's a safety device that it's a trailer they pull behind when they're doing work on the roads and things that has directional arrows, and so that's what it is. It's for safety purposes.
Okay, I think I'm ready.
All right.
Good morning,
Perfect.
Commissioners. Scott McMahon, Metro Communications. I do have a 2020 PowerPoint presentation that I have shown to the commissioners that are on Metro Management Council Board, which is Commissioner Karski and Commissioner Banganiga. I think for today's purpose, it's better use of our time to go through a 5-year budget plan for Metro Communications. And if there are questions related specifically to 2021 budget, I can bring that PowerPoint up and talk about any of those things that you might want to talk about. The document before you is a fairly extensive document that contains a lot of numerical information. So I think it might be prudent to just kind of give you an overview of what's in this particular document. So looking at the screen over here, along the left and right-hand side, you'll just see the line numbers. Same over here, the line numbers. Across the top, you'll see the budget years. So 2019 actual, 2020, 2021, 2022. And then if I page down just a little bit here, you'll be able to see 2023, 2024, and 25 are across the bottom.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we're going to get a copy.
Yeah.
So this particular commissioner has older eyes. So I'm struggling with the
I
numbers
did
a
bring
little
my
bit. Yeah.
glasses as well today, so.
I don't have one.
I think we're going to get a copy, so thank you.
Here's the next one, Cindy.
Okay. You need just a minute to get some copies, you said?
I think
Or
as
should I-
long as we're going to get one that we can take and look at later
Okay.
if we need to, that's going to be helpful. So I think you could go ahead and start unless anybody has objections. Okay.
Okay. To continue the overview of this document then, what I'd like to start with is line 1, and I would like to start in this year's budget, 2020. And you can see that line 1 talks about 911 surcharges. These are the surcharges and incentive funds that we receive from the State of South Dakota 911 Coordination Board. And this year, that number is $2,656,866. Right next to that, you'll see a percentage change, 1.5%. Unfortunately, with surcharges in this state, PSAPs are having to deal with that difficulty of only seeing a minor increase in percentage changes each year. As a matter of fact, if you look ahead to 2021 and 2022, it's only a 1% increase. We actually had to drop that from 1.5 to 1 because of the fact that we're just not seeing much for growth in the line counts that make up the surcharges.
As we have people listening, can you just explain what a PSAP is? 'Cause
Sure.
sometimes-
I apologize. A PSAP is a public safety answering point. We have 28 of those in the state of South Dakota, and those are commonly referred to as 911 centers. We do not only 911 business, but administrative calls as well, usually for police and sheriff's departments. So again, in looking at 2020 budget, line 1, with the PSAP revenue, that equals about 51.4% of our budget right now today. But as you look ahead, that number is going to decrease, especially if you look in the 2022 column, it's 48.3% of our budget. So that would tell you that if there isn't any growth in the PSAP funds, that number is going to decline as our costs increase, and unfortunately, we're going to need more local support. There are some things that we can do to try and keep the local support level at a minimum, which is, of course, operational operationally, we can make some changes. We're also trying to establish partnerships. Partnerships is one way that we'll be able to try and keep the local support down. So looking at line 2, which line 2 and 3, which talks about city and county support, if I move you over to the 2020 adopted budget on line 2 and 3, you'll see that there was a 25% increase in this year's budget for what the city and the county each contribute. For the city, that was about a $269,000 increase, and for the county, it was an $89,911 increase, which puts today's support for the county at $449,557. I'd like to move to the column, or budget year 2021, same line numbers, 2 and 3. You'll see again, we're asking for a 25% increase in 2021. As a result, that'll increase the city's contribution to increase it by $337,168, and for the county, you'll see an increase of $112,389. Before I get into justification for why we're asking for a 25% increase in a 2-year time frame, I'd like to go ahead and just look at the continuing years. So if we look at 2022, again, line 2 and 3, you'll see the county and city, we're asking for a 15% increase in support from each agency or each government entity. And for the county, that'd be $84,292 increase in 2022. Now, if we drop down to budget years 2023 through 25, which is at the bottom of the page, again, I'd like to point out in 2023, we're asking for a 13% increase from both the city and county. And in 2024, it'd be a 9% increase, and in 2025, an additional 9% increase from city and county government. So by 2025, you can see that the Minnehaha County's request would be $867,609 for a contribution, again, from Minnehaha County. So now I'd like to go back and just give you some justification as to why you're seeing a 100% increase in a matter of a 5-year time frame.
So before you get into that.
Sure.
My ears perked up when you said you were seeking partnerships.
Yes.
So can you explain what that is?
Well, I've reached out to the state government to see if there's some partnerships that we might be able to establish there with state radio communications. State radio does have partnerships with Rapid City or Pennington County 911, and they also have a partnership with PEER, which is Central Communications. So it seems like there might be an opportunity here in the southeast part of the state to form a partnership with the state of South Dakota for communications for basically all departments, everything from highway patrol to game fish and parks, DOT, whatever it might be.
And do those partnerships translate into less dollars required from us for funding? That's what I was trying to figure out.
Yes, well,
Okay.
that's the hope. I'm not looking to take on more workload and spend more dollars to make that happen. Instead, what I'm looking for is a partnership that would increase our workload with a minimum amount of staffing, and at the same time, the revenue will cover any increased costs we have and hopefully bring in a little additional revenue beyond our cost.
Commissioner Heiberger.
When you're talking about partnerships, and I don't sit on the 911 board, so I'm going to throw out a question that's maybe the elephant in the room. We
Sure.
have 28 PSAPs. Why in the world cannot the state come together and work together as a unit and get rid of a lot of these? Because you'd save a ton of money, and this is taxpayer dollars. Like I said, I'm throwing out the elephant in the room because I don't think this is right, and I don't know who's supposed to be having this conversation. It's not our fault that we have 28, but there's got to be a way to solve this issue.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've been in the position where I've had the opportunity to bring county governments together and bring 6 counties into one 911 center. Every time you do that, it's cost savings for the state, really, because if you bring 6 counties into one center, you're only buying one set of equipment. So in this last upgrade, it would have been maybe $400,000. That would have had to have been spent at all 6 counties. Instead, it was spent at one county. To serve all 6 counties 24 hours a day, you'd need about 36 staff. Instead, this particular county I'm talking about has 15 staff. So that's a prime example of what you just mentioned, Commissioner Heiberger, on how dollars can be saved. And hopefully with those savings by municipal governments coming together, that'll create a surplus at the state level, which then hopefully would trickle back in the form of PSAP revenue.
Commissioner Karski.
And in reality, and this is a song I've been singing for a few years, there's 32 PSAPs if you include the.
There is 4 tribal ones, yep, 4 tribal and 28 municipal government ones.
And there was recently a lawsuit settled with one of the carriers that resulted in a one-time payment.
Yes.
And it wasn't distributed pro rata, it was distributed evenly across everybody, not based on, budgetary needs. So, I mean, there's too many slices of this pie that the taxpayers of the entire state of South Dakota are being dealt a huge disservice the way this program is run, my opinion.
And we're seeing that across the nation. In other states, partnerships, collaboration, in some cases consolidation is occurring. There's a couple different reasons for that. One, I think the most important reason is quality of service. You definitely want the best quality of service. You don't want to cut corners in the 911 world because it's financially a better option. First, we have to make sure we have customer service in place, but then after that comes the financial picture of it is, can money be saved? And I think the answer is absolutely yes.
Commissioner Heiberger.
One follow-up question, and that is this a legislative decision or is this a governor decision? Where do you start?
I think both of the above. I think it's discussion that can happen at the state 911 coordination board level, and then perhaps trickle up to our legislative group, and then after that, of course, perhaps the governor of the state of South Dakota. I think all of the above. I think discussions start local and move up through state government.
Other questions? Sorry, we kind of hijacked your presentation.
Not a problem.
That was
Not a problem.
Helpful
So
discussion.
I'm just going to continue on here, and again, I think I left off on why is there an increase of 100% in a 5-year period. Let me offer some justification for that. Last year, we received authorization for this year's budget to hire 4 additional staff. So if we drop down to line 16 in this document and we go over to budget year 2020, you'll see a number of $267,437 in blue. That number represents the 4 operators that we hired this year. And we do have additional requests for years 22, 23, and 24. I'm trying to go into it as efficient or conservative as I can, and we're just asking for 1 operator at this point in each one of those years. I do want you to be aware that there is a national study out there, a national survey tool that suggests currently we're approximately 7 staff below what that recommended level is. So that's just something to keep in mind. I want you also to know that 87% of our budget is personnel related. So that only leaves 13% to cover contracts, to cover facilities, to cover anything other than personnel. It only leaves us 13%. So we are a very efficient organization in that regards. We do get support from the state with the telephone system. As a matter of fact, the state has taken ownership of the 911 telephone system, and the last upgrade we didn't have to pay anything for. I'm hopeful that going into the future, that'll continue to happen, that the state will take ownership of the telephone system. Okay, so, and I also want to just point out that, another reason for increase is operation. Operationally, contracts typically increase by 5% a year. There's going to be some future facility needs that are operational that will increase. And then we're trying to maintain a cash reserve. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I would like to back up to the additional employees. And let me just minimize this for a second and bring this up. So one thing I'm trying to do is for the 2021 budget is get an increase of $73,000, which is the equivalent of one full-time employee, but I want to use that for temporary staffing. And what you see is a chart of the total number of hours that we have used for temporary staffing from September through May of this year. And the $73,000 that I was referencing, out of all these hours that are added up here, I think there's about 1,600 hours. We would have spent $38,000 in temporary staffing. So what I'm saying here is that temporary staffing is a very good buy for us. We can get more hours per dollar out of temporary staffing than what we can in FTE. So I just want you to be aware of how many hours we're actually using our temporary staff. Right now we have 4, but there's always times where somebody leaves the workplace because of a change in their family environment, whatever it might be, and we've invested just a ton of time and effort into those employees, and we hate to see them leave the agency and not have an opportunity to contribute into the future in some shape or form. So temporary salaries will allow us to do that. They'll allow us to retain employees that might only be able to work on a temporary basis.
So when you say temporary staff, you're talking part-time, people that are working for you part-time?
I'm
This
talking-
is not overtime hours.
You're right. We have the classification of temporary, part-time, and then full-time. Our temporary staff does not include any benefits, and that's what we currently have. We currently don't have any part-time staff. Everybody's temporary without benefits.
Commissioner Heiberger?
It'd be kind of like the hospital's PRN staff. It's like if I need somebody I can pull out of this pool.
Yes. Yep. And it's been like I say, it's been a very good tool for us to be able to cover some hours. So, and like I say, we're using them for vacation leave, sick leave, supervisors opt to council so that they can do supervisory work that's not necessarily done on the floor, training, shift meetings, extra staffing. So we're really getting good bang for a buck there. Okay, let me go back to, oops. Okay, back to this document. I'm just going to move along a little bit more quickly here because I know there's a lot of information I want to mention. The other reason to justify support in your contributions is cash reserve. We're trying to keep a 15% cash reserve. So if you look at, let me page down here just a little bit. If you look at this year, 2020, which would be line 36 under the 2020 budget, you can see that after this year, we'll have a 26% cash reserve. As you go to 2021, 25%, 2022 at 23%, and then if you drop down to line 48 across the bottom of your page, you'll see in 2023 there's a 22% cash reserve, 2024 at 20%, and then by 2025 a 19%. So just above that 15% cash reserve that we're trying to maintain. So that's another reason to ask for the additional support. The other thing I want to point out is there was a business decision that was made back in 2008 going forward that the city and county would keep essentially their contributions at a minimum so that we'd spend down cash reserves. My understanding is back at that time there was about $2.5 million that was in reserve. And the reason for that is that there was an intent to buy a state telephone system or buy a telephone system. Instead, what happened is the state ended up buying the telephone system. So as a city and county government, the business decision was made to spend that reserve down. So over the years, let me just pull up a chart here. I can show you that the city and county contributions actually in 2008 were about the same as what they were in 2019. So there's actually a dip there for a while where the city and county contributions were less than what they were in 2008. And that happened in around that 2013, 2014 timeframe. So what we're doing today is necessary to keep us moving forward because of this period where you didn't maybe put in a 3% increase every year for the last 10 years. Instead, there was less contribution. So moving forward, we just need to make sure we stay caught up on that. The other thing, like I said, we talked about staffing. Staffing from 2008 to 2019, we increased by only three staff. Currently today, there's one operator per every 5,030 persons in our service area. The recommendation from this national survey tool that I spoke of says we should be at about one operator per every 4,400 people. So that's how they're saying we're about 7 communication operators short. But again, we've had very few increases in staffing up until this year, where we had the 4 additional staff. So, but that's always a concern related to budgets. Let me see. So we went through the increases. We went through where our reserves are going to be at. And I also wanted to point out that on line 47, by 2025, our reserves are going to be at that $554,000 range, which is, just slightly above that 15% of our budget. So that's the reason why we're seeing a 100% increase in 5 years, is to support operations, to support additional staff, to maintain that cash reserve. And and starting in 2022, there will be some facility needs, which I'll talk about here next. But any questions on what you see up here in this particular chart?
Commissioner Benninga.
Scott, when does the surcharge sunset go away?
That has passed where it will not sunset. It will stay as it is, the $1.25 per telephone line.
But the number of telephone lines that we can track is frankly flat or going down.
Correct.
Which makes no sense from an audit standpoint, that for some reason telephones have gone to obviously mobile phones, and if somebody keeps their mobile phone from moving from Georgia, for example, to South Dakota, that revenue source does not come back to South Dakota, even if they're using those phones for 911 support here, correct?
I believe if they change everything over like they should, their address information and all that, that revenue should come to us.
Should, but it does not.
Sometimes there's occasions where things don't get changed over and we don't always see that revenue, but for the most part, it's set up to have that revenue come to us. What I would like to comment on in reference to surcharges is just what you said. Back in 2012, 13, maybe even a little bit before then, you were seeing a transition where back in around 2010, 80% of the households had a landline. That flipped. Now it's 80% of the people have cell phones and only 20% maybe have a landline. So what's happened is that spike that we intended to see back in 2012, 13, 14 did happen, and it increased the revenue, but now it's just been relatively flat since then because it's only taken into consideration when you have new customers that come into the area.
Right.
Other questions?
Okay, if not, I'd like to just move in quickly and have a little bit of discussion on the police fire training facility. I want you to know that we are working on a business plan for the next 5 years, and we do have that compiled, and I was prepared to present that to you today, or at least furnish you a copy. But I just found out a week or so ago that we're going to see some cost estimates for this metro portion of the police training facility tomorrow. So I didn't want to give it to you today and then have new information come tomorrow, but I'm promising you that hopefully by the end of the week, we'll be able to get that document to you. And what that document will do, the 5-year business plan, is it'll highlight what we talked about up in this chart, as well as some of the other concerns about, what type of equipment's going to be needed, what type of maintenance facility, how will that impact our budget going forward. So We have done some preliminary estimates of what our costs are going to be for the facility. We're hopeful that the construction costs will be less than $5.5 million. And the reason for that is because based on some of the discussion between city and county is there'd be a 75-25 match. So great news this morning that I heard is the county has indicated $2 million for 2022. And that's great news.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't count on that. Forecast.
Those are forecasts, but that's still great news to hear. It's in the forecast anyway for 2022. And the city, you know, if they match that by the 75%, that's $6 million. So if construction costs would happen to come in at less than $5.5 million, we've already identified a need for $2.5 million worth of equipment. So, for example, radio equipment, not a cheap area at all. It's going to cost about $1.7 million to outfit this new facility with radio equipment. A communications tower, we're looking at over $200,000 for that. Workstation consoles, the consoles that each operator sits at, for 20 of those, it's going to be around $400,000.
Maybe you could mention why it is you're not just planning to move what you have over
Yes.
to the new place.
Great question, great point. We need to buy everything new in this new facility because we want to leave our current facility completely redundant, completely as a backup. That's not uncommon at all to have that. Matter of fact, in this state, Pennington County has a completely redundant backup center, and I know Watertown has our backup center, but not as many councils as what they normally operate with, which is where we're at today. We have a backup center. It's just that we only have 6 councils, and typically we need at least 10 on a daily basis, so it puts us 4 short. What this will do, if we leave our current facility as is, it will give us the option to move from the new site if we have to, if there's some type of a fiber cut, whatever it might be, to move back to the old site and be fully operational. It'll also give us another site to work out of in case we get 2 foot of snow and we can't get to the primary center or the new facility. We could still have a report to workstation here. It also gives us an overcapacity type situation where if the new center, we have every council being used because of some natural disaster, whatever it might be, we'll have additional councils here to use. So it's really going to put us in a great position for redundancy and capability.
Commissioner Karski.
Scott, going back to the prior conversation, when we kind of went off on a tangent, we don't need 28 backup facilities in the state either. Could this backup facility be the backup for any other of the 28 PSAPs in the state?
It could, and that's what Next Gen 911, that's one of the main elements of Next Gen 911 is to have what's called policy routing. So with that, because we're now in an IP network situation, everybody in the state except for Metro is currently on that policy routing where if we don't pick up a call within 20 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever that timer is set at, that call will roll over to another PSAP. Eventually, when we are on that system with Metro, if we don't answer that call within a designated amount of time, it'll go to Lincoln County. The next one after that will go to Pier, Central Communications. The next one after that will go to Watertown. The problem is when you have a large facility like Metro, if we start rolling calls over to those other centers, we could inundate them very easily because they just don't have the staff to be able to deal with the sheer volume of calls that we might send them. We''ve had some incidents, the tornado, where we answered 600 and some calls in a matter of a few hours. The latest protest event a couple weeks back, we answered 269 911 calls and another 396 business line calls in a matter of, from 4 p.m. to midnight. So again, that would inundate a smaller center that only has 1 or 2 people working. Some other issues with it is getting the call back to us. So if a call rolls from Metro over to Watertown or Pier, how do they get that information back to us? And that's some of the things we're working through is through CAD, through just plain old telephone system picking up and calling us back. But if we're already inundated, we may not answer that business line because we have other 911 lines coming in. So there's just some details that need to be worked out.
You can answer the call, but if you have nobody to send out on it, what
And
good is it?
that's the problem. If it rolls to Watertown or Pier, they don't have any way to page out our fire department. They don't have any way to page out our EMS. So until some of those radio developments happen, where everybody's on like a statewide radio system, which does exist today, but until that all happens, the policy routing isn't exactly 100% foolproof. Okay, back to the facility. So I went through some of those projects that would need to be done, about $2.5 million worth of equipment. But also there's going to be some annual recurring costs, and I just wanted to cover those quickly with you. We have visited with the city. They have given their stamp approval on this chart that's up there on the screen. But also we've had some discussions about what would be expected of Metro for this new facility. And we're talking about $40,000 in janitorial support, $60,000 for shared utilities, and then we're going to have some additional expenses of our own because we're now taking care of 2 facilities for like broadband, for Motorola support. We're looking at about $42,000 additional in maintenance contracts for Motorola. Logging recorder, which records all our telephone and radio traffic, we're looking at about another $20,000 a year in contractual support. So we are going to have, roughly $150,000 a year in annual expenses because of moving into a new facility. So just wanted you to be aware of what we know today, and that will all come to you in that business plan as soon as we get the information plugged in. Otherwise, if there's any other questions I can answer today, I certainly will. But I think that's a good snapshot overview of where we are for the next 5 years, and I think we'll be in good position with your continued support. And I just wanted you to understand, though, why we're asking for those increases of 25, 25, 15, 13, 9, and 9.
Well, we appreciate your time today. I mean, obviously, those are kind of eye-popping numbers, and you weren't here earlier, but our revenue increases don't track those expense increases. And so, but at the same time, I would say that I think if you ask any citizen of Minnehaha County, they would view your services as very high priorities for them. I know we had a fire start out in our neighborhood yesterday, and without your services, we wouldn't have gotten the first responders there so quickly to handle it. And so all of us are utilizing these or want to be able to utilize them if they are needed. And so it's just a question of figuring out how to pay for it.
Well, thank you. We're glad to serve the public, and the public relies upon us to be there in a time of an emergency, and we're there to meet that need. So appreciate your support in helping us. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that takes us to the end of our agenda for this morning. So we will take a break until 1 p.m. and we will be back for more fun at 1 p.m. today. So thank you, everyone.
Metabank it renamed.
I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. Thank you all for coming back. I always think it takes a lot of bravery to come back for the second session of budgeting. And so, but we will go ahead and get started, and Monty's going to give us a little munis deposition or demonstration. So we have some idea what we're doing up here.
Good afternoon. On your laptop, you should have Munis already open. If at any point in time you need help, I'll be here this afternoon to help you out. I don't know how much you'll need it, but I'll just give you just a quick demo. So if you were to close out of it, as you can see on my desktop here, there's the Munis icon. I tried to put them kind of top and center for you. So you can just double click on that if you need to relaunch it. That will bring you to this main dashboard screen. And I'm just going to show just a couple of items over here on the left that you can use. So underneath of budget, I'm going to expand that. There's something there called central budget entry. If you click on central budget entry, it's going to take you to kind of a search screen. And I'm going to click on the advanced search button up on the towards the upper left. And here in the department section, we can click on the magnifying glass and then the drop-down list. If you're not catching up with me, I'll be around to help you out. And then from here, you would choose whatever department you want. Okay, I believe the sheriff's office is up. I don't know that you're actually going to be diving into this for their portion, but I'm just going to choose sheriff as an example. Okay, and okay. So here for this budget then, you can kind of scroll through. Some departments may put other items, attached files and whatnot. A lot of them probably don't have additional documentation, but you can kind of scroll through these. This department, the sheriff's office, has enough entries that it looks like I've got a page 2. So down at the bottom, if I click on the 2, it takes me to the second page. And I want to point out at the top here, it took us kind of to a second tab. So we're just in Internet Explorer, and so I have 2 tabs. So I could leave this one open, go back to that main home screen, and I again could click on Central Budget Entry to open up another tab. Again, I could click on Advanced to do my search for another department. So you could have multiple departments open at once if you want. I'll just open one more department up here.
Monty, you might want to filter it to expenses a little also.
Okay, thank you for that tip. Okay, so what Kim pointed out is for some of these departments, the sheriff's ones in particular, it will show us revenues and expenses. So if we wanted to filter out and just show expenses, in this situation I chose the jail department, and I changed this account type here towards the bottom left to expense, and then I'll click on OK. So to my point earlier, now I have a second tab here with the jail up, central budget entry here in my second tab. It's kind of, once I choose that department, it's kind of hard to see which department is which. I'm going to go back to my home screen.
Tell me how you got to the expenses again, this Meg?
Yep, so back on one of my tabs here, when I go into, click on Advanced Search.
Yep.
Down here in the bottom left,
No,
there's...
type. Oh, it's on the far side. Okay, thank you.
And if you get multiple of these tabs open, it's going to be easy to get confused on which department is on which tab. So back on this first original tab at the dashboard, you have a link for org code listing. If you click on that, you'll see the different org codes and what department those codes are for. I don't know if I should jump into Account Central. I'm going to at least mention it, and then it's up to you if I go into that. But if you click on Account Central, you can search for all previous purchases. So you can drill into invoices if you want, or just look at the amount spent per line item, if you will. So there's a bunch of information in there if you so choose to do that. And if you want a demo of that, I can give a quick demo.
And Monty, you can link to that if you're in central budget entry.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to that.
Okay.
And just click on the blue
Yeah.
account name, and that's going to take you directly to Account Central.
I'm going to pick something else here. I will just pick office supplies, let's say. Yep, so good point. Thank you, Kim. So here, I just chose office supplies out of the sheriff's office, right? So you can see what they budget per year the past couple of years. And down below here, you know, you could drill, if you click on this details, you can drill into the actual invoices. Up here at the top is where you choose different previous years.
And you got there by clicking on accounts?
I got there by,
You click
in
on,
the, yep, on this description tab here in central budget entry. If you click on one of those, it will launch another tab, which is actually Account Central. And then from there, you can, again, drill further into actual invoices if you want. To actually see the invoice, you click on details, but just even at this screen, you could see purchases, amounts, the vendor, that kind of stuff. Anything else you can think of, Kim?
You're not giving us a test afterwards, right?
And I will be here, so just raise your hand if you want me to come through and help you with anything.
All right. Any other questions for Monty? Everybody but me is an expert up here, so we're ready.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. All right, so then according to our agenda, we are going to go into presentations regarding the new positions that are requested. And we're going to start with the sheriff, which includes the jail. And I understand Sheriff Milstead is next door and is going to make his way over. Like magic, he appears.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Milstead, your sheriff. I have a number of my command staff here to answer any questions or kind of explain briefly what the position requests are. Grant expiring position, a reclass, and so to start with, I have Captain Joe Bosman, who will speak to a couple of the items, and then I'll be in the room on standby. Chief Deputy Gromer will follow up Captain Bosman, and then Captain Walsh is on Zoom, should you have any questions about the reclass. So we'll start with Captain Bosman.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Joe Bosman with the Sheriff's Office. I'm going to touch real briefly on the grant position that we're asking to absorb into the Sheriff's Office budget for 2021. The new position request has a lot of the details that are into it. This is a federal COPS grant that was awarded to us mid-2018, and it's a 2-year grant. It's set to expire the end of 2020. This position allows us to increase our role in the drug task force from 1 investigator, that's been only 1 there for many, many years, to 2. And that is a huge increase for us at the contribution with the amount of drug crimes that are occurring in our area as well. To put that in perspective, the Sioux Falls Police Department has 11 investigators on that task force. South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation has 2 investigators on that task force. So for us, being able to put a contribution of 2 into that is much beneficial. Also, a lot of the drug seizures that have been occurring that the task force focuses on is pretty high-end seizures, main drug dealers, but that doesn't mean that there still isn't drug cases where lower-end users need to be investigated, and the smaller drug crimes also need to be looked at. So by allowing 2 investigators to cover those crimes in the county, can divvy up that area as well. The reason this one might be a little bit higher, if you notice the cost for this position, is because the grant allowed us to hire a replacement. They understand that when you hire with a grant, you don't hire someone brand new, never been a cop, and say, congratulations, you're a drug investigator. But what it does allow is we can hire someone new to replace the backfill that was selected for that drug investigator spot. So what it is this person, this deputy that has been hired back in 2018 for this grant position, is now at this salary pay grade that we would need to absorb if awarded this general budget fund for this.
Questions?
Okay.
All right.
I think, do we want to go to, should we go to Mike Walsh so he can talk about the reclass real quick while we're on the sheriff's office budget?
Good afternoon.
Thanks for having us. We are sitting pretty good staffing wise, so that's why no requests for any additional personnel. The one area that we seem to be lacking, and the sheriff and Captain Bosman and I tried to address it this past year, trying to think of an innovative way to maybe fix the problem, but we just couldn't come up with something that worked really well, and that's supervision on weekends. We sit really strong with supervision on nights based on the reclass you gave us last year, and it's been very effective. The supervision on nights with our young deputies who are very capable and motivated, they just don't have the experience all the time to make the right calls during like an in progress call. But the one area where we're lacking is weekend days. During the week, the sheriff, the chief deputy, Captain Bosman, Captain Phillips, and I, all of the investigations division sergeants, we're all on duty and available pretty easily, and most of us listen to the radio in our offices in the event something's happening. But on weekends, if the sergeant isn't on, because we only have one sergeant per day shift, then a lot of times they can run into some issues with some in progress stuff. So what I'm asking for is just to reclass one of our deputy positions to a sergeant position, and I believe Captain Bosman had the specific amount, but I believe it was right around $9,000 to do that. And what that will do is give us the ability to have supervision essentially 24 hours a day for these deputies. That position will cover the weekend days instead of being assigned to a specific blue or yellow shift. They will just be weekend days, and we'll make it a policy that a sergeant always be on duty. In the event that one takes vacation, we have to ensure the other one is on duty.
Questions about that? Commissioner Karski.
How many sergeants do you have how many sergeants are there supervising patrols right now? Basically,
within the patrol, yes, sir. Within the patrol division itself, there are 6 sergeants. There's 2 per night shift, and if you're not familiar with how our shifts work, we have blue and yellow. We work 12-hour shifts, and so we have 2 blue night shift, 2 blue yellow shift, and then during the day, 1 per blue shift and 1 per yellow shift. And so we have a total of 6. And then in investigation, civils, and warrants, there are 3 additional ones. But as far as supervising deputies in the field, we have a total of 6.
so this would give you a 7th.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
They saved the best for last, huh?
Well, I don't know about that. That's pretty generous. I can address the 2 jail requests. The first is to fund a position that's coming off of grant funding. That one was implemented about a year ago through the MacArthur grant. That person was programmed into the original plans for the jail expansion. With the addition of the grant funding, we were just able to get that person instituted sooner rather than later. So as that one comes off a grant, we'd be asking to fill that position at a corporal level, basically to supervise the jail programs, the 24/7 program, the electronic monitoring program, continue to work with pretrial, and work out of that program section of the new jail. The second position is for additional staff at our front desk area. That's a customer service related position, and what we see in that position is a very high volume of phone calls, foot traffic, and it's just difficult for one person to keep up. That would move over to the position would move over to the new jail, provide us some consistent face, consistent understanding of the things that go on at that front desk. Right now it's covered by shift personnel, so that rotates day to day and shift to shift. So if we're able to hire somebody to put in as the full-time, basically receptionist type position to increase that customer service at the front desk, and then we can supplement that with the current shift staff that covers that position as well. The volume is just to the point where it's very difficult for one person to keep up with the peak volumes at the front desk.
Questions?
Of course.
Commissioner Bed, oh, sorry. We'll go with Commissioner Karski and then Commissioner Benega.
For that position, you know, I'm thinking from my background in insurance and work comp and that type of thing. Usually you have a return to work program, like reduced work, somebody that couldn't go back to being a correctional officer. I mean, is this the type of position that you can transition a person back to work?
As far as like a light duty position?
Yes.
Yes, it would, yes is the short answer, but we typically, with our current light duty personnel, will put them on one of the unit controls where they run the doors and the security electronics on the particular floor, or they can work in master control. So with the addition of the new jail, we'll have 3 separate unit control posts as well as 2 in master control. This front desk position we're looking for is really to provide some consistency to that front desk. There's a wide range of questions and interactions that come in that it would be nice to have somebody in that position who works it every day, and when people are coming in and asking these questions, they get a consistent message. When we rotate staff through there, there's a lot of these things that come up that the rotating staff don't know the answers to, and then people get inconsistent answers. It also helps, it'll help us address the volume. There's a lot of times when the volume of phone calls that are coming into that front desk overwhelm the officer working there, and then they roll over into master control. I'm not a huge fan of master control focusing on phone calls when they have the volume of traffic inside the jail that I'd rather have them monitor.
Appreciate it. You answered both questions, and I'm glad to hear you have a return to work program that way. Thank you.
Commissioner Benega?
Jeff, just a quick question on, excuse me, the correctional systems operator has a base salary of about 35, and then the estimated cost is 55 about. That's about a 65% increase over the base, and I'm assuming there's no car involved in
No,
that.
there is not.
So why would there be a 65% benefit package, so to speak?
I don't have an answer for that for you off the top
Harry
of my
Deaver
head.
might, however. Oh.
It's OSI, STRS.
Oh, thank you.
15,000 for health and dental insurance.
Basically the retirement benefit.
The benefit package.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, I was able to get it answered right away. Anything else?
Other questions?
All right.
All right, thank you. Okay, so next up is the state's attorney, Crystal Johnson, who I saw earlier, so I believe is out there somewhere. Hi.
Hello, good afternoon. Usually I say good morning, good afternoon. My name's Crystal Johnson. I am the Minnehaha County State's Attorney. This year I requested 1 legal office assistant position for our office to help kind of get us up to speed, help us get caught up. As we talked about before, I've reorganized the office into our felony divisions. One of the things that our attorneys spend a lot of time doing are non-legal work, whether we are missing files, if it's something that went into court yesterday, got passed to today, we end up spending a lot of time looking for files that if we were adequately staffed in the front end, it would be things that we wouldn't have to spend so much time on. Our legal office assistants answer the phones. They print off in the morning, they print off all the police reports of people who are in custody for our attorneys to review. Our digital technicians and our investigators print off the NCIC report, which is a criminal history, because a lot of times in charging decisions, we got to know what their history is to know whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony charge. So then our legal office assistants have to match all of those up. They get them to the appropriate people who are making the charging decisions that day. They get them returned to them, and then they have to have everything filed, typed up and filed with the clerk of courts by 10:30 in the morning. We currently have 10 legal office assistants. 2 of them work solely with the A&N division, working on abuse and neglect cases, which involves getting paperwork filed, submitting notices for parents, putting notices in proper publications that have the A&N pending. One of them works solely with our juvenile division. I believe our juvenile division, as of last month, had 1,700 open files. We have 168 open open A&N cases. And then the other 7 LOAs are designated for the adult criminal prosecution, and then our civil LOAs. Our felony legal office assistants each are assigned 5 attorneys, except for the one who does grand jury preparation, and so they average approximately 2,000 files for their 5 attorneys. Most of our attorneys carry somewhere, I'm on the low end of 176 open files, and then we have attorneys who have upwards towards 700 open files. And so then they have to work on getting discovery provided. If there's any legal paperwork that needs to be filed, they prepare that and get that ready to go. They help locate cases when they get ready to go into court. Every single day we have at least 3 courtrooms going between first appearances. Then we have a pretrial conference courtroom, and then we kind of have a plea and sentencing courtroom. So we have 3 courtrooms that we have going every single day, that we have to make sure we have all the files ready to go on those. And so then it's pulling files, getting all that information on top, and then still dealing with the public, still answering the phone, still working with the attorneys. And so when we look at kind of the overall office structure, that's one of the holes that I think is probably most glaringly obvious. We have 2 paralegals who actually do advanced clerical work, advanced legal office assistant work with circuit court docketing files and preparing those judgments. And it would be nice if we could focus them on doing paralegal work and assisting the attorneys, and then being adequately staffed for legal office assistant.
Commissioner Benega.
Crystal, how many open files do you have total? I mean, you gave us some numbers, but I can't add that quick.
No, but if I had to look, if I can do my math quickly, I would say our criminal files that we have open as of last month when we read the numbers is somewhere between 8,500 and 9,000 cases.
Thank you.
We started jury trials this week, so hopefully we can start whittling that down.
Other questions? Okay. All right, I think that's it.
Okay.
Oh, Commissioner Heiberger, I couldn't tell if you were trying to ask a question or not.
See if that was the end, but I apologize if I wasn't listening in the beginning, but who is talking about the juvenile diversion office coordinator in the state's attorney's office? No one?
We have, the juvenile diversion coordinator is not a new position.
I know, but it's on grant funded, and so I didn't know if anybody was speaking to it, or are we just gonna just go for the flow, and I don't care, but I know where I am, but.
So, to Crystal's benefit, you know, she was really probably, and this would be my bad, told to talk about new positions she was requesting.
Okay.
And so, you know, the issue, and I appreciate that we pulled out all these positions, these grant-funded positions this year, so we could all keep better track of them, because they are all challenging in the sense that they all seem like a good idea, and a particularly good idea when somebody else is paying for them. But then when we run into a situation where they may or may not be funded again, which is where we are with several of these positions right now, whether we can keep them or not. And I guess, Kim, does the budget you provided this morning, does it include any of the grant-funded positions?
They are all.
That's what I thought. Yeah, so they're already included, and right now we're really focusing on whether we'd add new positions in or not.
Thank you for the clarification.
And I know we had applied for the one, I think that would be under the sheriff's office, the adult diversion coordinator that we had applied for, and I don't think we've heard word on that grant at this point with the public and safety challenge.
That's for the next round of my.
Okay.
Thanks, Crystal.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
coming down. Okay, so that takes us to the Public Defender's Office, and I know Tracy Smith is here as well. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Tracy Smith, Public Defender's Office. For the 2021 budget, we are asking the Commission to authorize us to hire 1 deputy public defender, 1 paralegal, and authorization to promote one attorney to a senior trial attorney position and promote one of our paralegal positions to a senior paralegal position. This morning, when I was listening to the overview, it was mentioned that I believe our personnel growth since 2011 has been 27%. And I would like the opportunity to put that number into perspective and mention that in the last 10 years, our caseloads have increased by 45%. And overall, our cost per case, when you look at our overall budget, in the last 40 years, our cost per case has remained steady at $376 per case. It is imperative when we consider when our office can't handle cases and outside private counsel has to be appointed, that cost is significantly higher and jumps up at a cost per case of $1,216 per case. Drug cases in the last 10 years have increased by 268% in Minnehaha County. And in terms of public safety and ensuring that we are providing an efficient and effective delivery of services, our office is providing an effective service to the public, and our department is only 11% of the amount of funds that are going towards public safety. In addition to what we're providing to each of our clients on an individual basis, our office is also providing representation to all of the alternative courts, drug court, DWI court, Veterans Court, and now mental health court as of this year, with no additional funding at the state level, no additional funding that goes into how we calculate cases. We are very happy, these are very important courts, we're happy to provide that service, but by providing that service, we are reducing numbers to the county jail, and we are providing additional savings to the state, specifically through the Department of Corrections, by reducing the number of people that go to the prison. So I do understand and recognize that we are asking a lot by asking the commission to approve both of these positions. Given the limitation that the commission has right now, if it comes down to choosing, we would ask the commission to consider stagger starting, maybe to consider authorizing us to start the paralegal position in January, and then maybe due to, with the situation with the bar exam, the students often get their results in March and September, maybe authorizing us to start the attorney position later in the year instead of simply saying you only get one. We are willing to consider that. We have, because of the COVID pandemic situation, we have held off on hiring positions when we haven't had an immediate need, when the court system was slow, and when we want to have interns that we really, really like. We have in the past held off on hiring students until they get their bar results. So we do feel that that would be a viable option instead of not authorizing both of those positions. From our annual report in 2019, we do base our request for positions on that report. We do currently have 26 attorneys. In that report, we projected a need for 36 full-time positions based on our caseload. So we do feel that limiting our request to one attorney and one paralegal is recognizing the limitations that the county has right now with the current financial constraints. The concern that we have is also if we are not providing adequate staffing, the problem is habeas cases go up. If we are not providing quality representation, clients get upset. They ask the court to appoint the public advocate's office, and we have to withdraw. Or they file an application for habeas corpus, and then those cases drag out longer. And then the post-conviction matters can be very time-consuming for both the civil division for the state's attorney's office, and so things have to be done twice or much longer. So it is much more cost-effective if we have sufficient time to visit with our clients, to talk to them, to make sure that their needs are being met. And as representatives of Minnehaha County, we want to make sure that we're representing clients the way they should be represented. As far as the promotional requests, we have changed, as Crystal indicated, we have made changes as to how we assign cases. We have a felony violent division. We also have a nonviolent division. It's helped with how we train new attorneys when they're coming up to start felonies for the first time, so that they aren't automatically assigned to violent felonies where people are facing life in prison. We've also assigned senior trial attorneys to supervise each of those divisions so that they have better training in each of those divisions. With the request for the additional senior trial attorney position, because we are working with so many specialty courts now, with the drug court, the DWI court, it just makes much more sense to have a supervising attorney helping out to ensure that we have best practices and standards and procedures in place, so that each of the attorneys on those courts are following the same protocol. Any questions?
Questions for Tracy?
Not for Tracy, but maybe for Kim, if I could.
Okay.
Kim, are the increases to deputy or to senior trial attorney and to supervisor, are they factored into one of those?
No.
Not factored into any of our assumptions then?
No.
Okay.
They were treated just like a new position request, and they are excluded from the projections right now.
Full amount or just for the increase?
The increase amount.
Just the increase, okay. What are those increases, do we know?
They're on that slide that Carrie provided this morning. If you
Okay.
go,
Total about 15,000.
Yeah.
There were three
Okay,
proposed
okay,
reclassifications.
okay.
Tracy, to reclassify the attorney was $4,255, and for the reclassify the paralegal, it was $3,054.
And that's not factored into either, or no, it is factored into the requested, the original requested amount.
They're considered
All-
like new positions.
Yep,
It's
okay.
money
So
we have to add in.
then for Tracy, you were saying that you could live with, or it would be acceptable to add a position for an attorney later in the year? How late in the year? Are we talking August, September?
Yes, if it were to come down to needing to wait until later in the year, given the bar exam, since we usually wait on hiring around the bar exam anyway,
Okay.
we would do that.
September is when they would be getting their results back, whether they
Right.
pass the bar.
So one thing that, and Commissioner Heiberger and I are aware of this, but maybe I shouldn't be letting the cat out of the bag or our strategy, but our specialty courts aren't funded by the state legislature, and everybody else's are. And it's because we took the lead and showed that it could work, and they said, well, you don't need it because you guys are doing it. Kind of, sort of. Well, we don't think that's quite fair, so we're gonna be trying, because it's gonna take a legislative fix to get money through the UJS from the legislature to fund our specialty court, which is the equivalent of one full-time attorney.
It's about, didn't we decide it was about 65,000, so it's not quite one full attorney.
Just about.
But, yes, they're paying for that legal representation at Public Defender's Office for the other counties that use them, but not for us. We're the only ones that are not getting funded.
Do they fund the state's attorney's office
No,
then?
just the public defenders who are representing those people in the specialty courts.
So, we're trying to work through a legislative approach to get more funding to take care of that position, which would help reduce some of the budget constraints of adding this person to the public defender's office. So kind of an FYI, I guess, for everybody to be aware of.
But at the earliest, that would likely not be here until
Next July.
July.
Yeah. I mean, 'cause, yeah, it's
So
typically.
half of next year.
And that's why I asked
Under the
about
best
the,
of circumstances.
yep,
Okay.
the implementation of that, so.
So legislatively, I mean, I've talked to Craig a little bit to Carol about it, and this would be a Minnehaha County bill. We'd have to get one of our own representatives here to sign on to a bill for us, because the association won't do it, because we're the only ones that aren't getting it, and so it's a specialty for Minnehaha County, so we can't get support from SDACC as far as the whole association, because it only affects us.
Even Pennington's getting funding.
Even Pennington's getting funded. In fact, they were the first ones that came out and said, we can't do this because you aren't giving us any money, so. So anyway, it's in the talks, so we're looking at that.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
This is
Commissioner
John.
Barth.
Could we change the screen so I can see the positions being requested? All I'm seeing is the munis stuff here.
Okay, we'll pull up Carrie's slide from this morning.
Thank you.
At least that's what I'm looking at. I think that's helpful. All right, are there other questions for Tracy? Commissioner Barth, did you think you'll have questions for Tracy after we find this slide for you?
No, thank you very much, but I might call her later.
Okay.
All right.
She will look forward to that.
Have a good day.
All right, thank you, Tracy. All right, so the next item is a elections position requested by the auditor's office. Carol's going to come up. I understand the auditor might be ill today.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Carol Muller. Yes, Auditor Litz is out today. He has put in a request for a senior tech person, I believe. Is that the correct title for it? I guess I really can't speak to that at all. We know that elections fall every other year, so 2020 has been a heavy year for that. The next time will be 2022 and then 2024 when there is a presidential election.
So he's asking for an election position for next year when there are no elections. So, all right. So that takes us to 5, which is the treasurer's office.
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick question about the auditor?
Yes.
This is Jeff. So don't we have cross-training going on in that department so that Heather is not the only one that's an election specialist, is she? Or
You know what? Yeah, I think we should, any questions about that probably need to go directly to the auditor. And so if he's back tomorrow, maybe we'll invite him to come in and visit a little bit about that. So.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
I guess I'll start to tell you what we need, and that means we probably need 5 employees, but I asked for 1. That's how much growth there's been in this county in the 15 years that I've been here. We have about 1 additional staff person in the 15 years I've been here. Quite frankly, we need an additional person to answer the phone, so then we'd have 2 people that did nothing all day that were answering the phone. Right now, we have 3 people who could answer the phone, but most of them are doing their other jobs, and only 1 is really assigned officially to doing just the phone. And I know that you've been receiving calls about the phone length, as I have. And if you've noticed, we've had anywhere in the last, after you reopen, 4-hour lines to 3.5 to the average is about 2 to 2.5-hour lines in our office. So I think we need an additional person for phones. We need an additional person, 2 people to fill in at the window. So we got the wait time. When I started, it was between 2 and 3.5 hours, and we got it down to 15, 20 minutes or less with basically the same amount of staff. But we made some other changes that made us more efficient. But there's only so efficient that you can be. And I think we've maxed out the efficiency that you can get, so I think you're gonna just have to start having a few more people there to answer it. We need a couple people that would be, because at the window, everybody gets the 2 15-minute breaks, everybody gets an hour for lunch, but in order to keep that wait time down to 15, 20 minutes or less, then you have to have 12 windows going at all times. And we've been able to do that by taking the back office people and they don't get their stuff done, then to fill in at the window so the public doesn't have to bear the brunt of the short staffing that we have currently. So we need 5 people, like I said, but if you give me one, we'll try to make that work. And then you're gonna have to give me one again next year and the year after that, because you need to catch up. And if you look at, we figure there's about, I have a whole bunch of numbers about the population growth and the number of parcels if you want those. But generally speaking, we are just understaffed. You have the same staff that we had when I came. And that's just enough to not enough to accommodate the growth. Like, for example, we worked Saturday, but we weren't open to the public. We had to do the mail because we didn't have anybody to do mail. I did mail all day. The deputy treasurer did some mail, and we have our tax and license supervisors that were doing the mail, but we still couldn't keep up. When we were shut down, we got way behind, and because everybody had to do everything by mail. So if you come to my window and you do a transaction, we can tell you right there and then if you are missing a signature on your title, or if you don't have your title application, you can fix that thing right away. But if we don't get to that for 6 weeks, and then you find out, and we have to, if you don't give me a telephone number that works, your voicemail isn't set up, or your voicemail is full, then we have to mail it back, and then you have to get what you need. And we did send out to some people a list of things that they might, if you wanted to do this or that, what you would have to have with you to do it, hoping that would help some. We do try to write. Now, I go out and if I'm not doing it, then sometimes both of us are doing it, but we try to go through the people's paperwork as they stand in line, so they find out sooner rather than later that they don't have what they need. So I guess my faith is in your hands.
Questions for the treasurer? Commissioner Benega.
Pam, just one question I can think of right now.
Okay.
Do you keep track of the internet growth of people who have applied for the licenses or tax?
Yep.
The growth of that
Yeah,
versus
it's about,
what it was?
It was about 10% when I came, and it's about between 10 and 13% right now. One thing that makes the difference there, I think, is we have a high concentration of elderly people in South Dakota, and those people prefer to do business other than on the internet. But I think as the population changes a little bit, that will change a little bit too, but it stayed about the same.
If you could get those to us, I would question that latter statement you made. I know in my other job, almost all of our elderly clients are now using Zoom to sign their wills and doing all of their work electronically. So I think there's a bit of a learning curve there, but I think if we encourage people that they are willing to use and are actually happier doing that, because then they aren't forced to come down in person and possibly expose themselves to health conditions that are very concerning for them. So I think all people are willing and able to do it. It's a matter of us encouraging folks and making sure they're aware of those options.
And we encourage them all the time, but there's...
If you could get us the statistics about the growth, I think those numbers are really surprising to me, so I'd like to see the growth in the use of online opportunities in particular.
Well, last I checked, it was around a little over 10%, and that's about what it was when I came. But we do everything, they know they can do it online. They also can use the self-serve kiosk. They can do it by mail. But if you want to use a self-serve kiosk, the only thing you can do there would be a renewal. And everything in your file has to be absolutely correct. The state's records have to be absolutely correct. That means they have to have a current address, they have to have a current driver's license, and those things aren't always accurate. So then you can't work at the self-serve kiosk. But still, when I was out in the line, like in the last couple of weeks, most of the people there are title transfers. And that's in part because the interest rates are so low on new vehicles. So people are buying new vehicles, and that's why you have so many title transfers. Like, we did 514 title transfers on Saturday. We did 412 on Friday and 200 and some on Thursday. So the average was, before this, was around 212.
Commissioner Heiberger.
So title transfers can be mailed in, they don't have to stand in line for them?
Well, they can be.
So that'd be another thing we should push. Don't stand in line for 4 hours if you can mail it in, because
problem
that makes
is
it better for us too.
That it's a very complicated process. and people don't always have what they need. If you come to the window and you don't have your title signed, or if you don't have a title application, the clerk can print off the title application, you can sign it, you can sign the back of the title. If you send it in by mail and you didn't get that, then it takes us to process that the first time, then it has to be mailed back to you, or we try to get you on the phone, and you would have to send a blank check or credit card information, which a lot of people aren't willing to do. I mean, because you'd make the check out to the Minnehaha County and don't fill in the amount. Because you won't know how many taxes and things you're gonna pay, so it's not probably for involving title transfers the best way to do business.
It sounds like a technology thing could work this out, though, so that
Well,
you
it
could
doesn't,
go on
but-
and explain it on internet, and that you should be able to type in the numbers and it would come up with what your tax, I mean, there's gotta be a way to do that. I'm not technologically smart enough to do that, but there's gotta be somebody that you could just figure that out. You can amortize your interest rate on your homes. You'd think you could figure out your taxes on your vehicle if it was new.
It depends on a lot of things. That's the problem. And plus, if you do it that way, you have to give some, I don't know, most people aren't comfortable giving up their title, because if the title gets lost in the mail or whatever, then you have to go, it's a difficult, lengthy process to go get a duplicate and get your title again, and you have to have it before you want to sell the vehicle or whatever. So, for whatever reason, people are preferring to do business the way they do. And we have a lot more of titles right now backed up because of the weeks that we were closed, and people did do that, and well, then we have to get a hold of them, we have to let them know what they didn't do, what they need. We sent out papers trying to tell them that, but, you know, it's just kind of complicated.
I would say that you do have really good information on the website, so
Yes, we
folks
do.
should be able to go through that and see exactly what they needed to do for a title. And I would also say that when I've encouraged folks to check out the kiosk, and when I used it myself, I was shocked how easy it was and thrilled that I was able to do it so quickly. So I think that is a really great alternative for a lot of people who are just renewing.
Yeah,
So,
and it's helpful in that regard, but like I said, you have a whole lot of title transfers, and that you cannot do as easily. You can do it, most people aren't comfortable doing it. And then it is a little more expensive, because if you do it by credit card, then you would have to, they charge you the 2.35% in addition, and the mailing fee.
Cheaper than 2 hours in line.
I mean, everybody has choices. I mean,
Yes, they do.
people have choices.
I
We just
agree.
want to make sure that everybody knows their choices.
Yeah, when we try
So-
to tell people that.
Are there other questions for the treasurer while she's here? All right, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
All right, so that takes us to, we're ahead of schedule. And the next item is commission identification of additional departments or outside agencies to present. I'm listed as the person here, and so all that means is I'm looking at the rest of you, and are there any, Commissioner Heiberger?
The only one I would ask is that we just get an answer to that question from the courts, as the fees decreasing, court fees decreasing. That's the only question that I've come up with today. And I don't know that you have to have a presentation, you just need to have a response.
Okay. Can we delegate that to you, Carol, to reach out to Carl? Thank you. Anybody else have, Commissioner Karski?
I received from the director of Makita Lakita, how we pay $5,000 to the org, and I just hate to see Lincoln County being more supportive than us. They pay $8,900 to the organization, so.
My response to that would be if we tried to compete with the city on every single thing the city did, then that's not a fun game to play for us.
Nope, not the city. This is Lincoln County paying it to their organization, and
There have to be better reasons for us to increase our contribution to Makita Lakita than that, but that's my own personal opinion.
I think for many years, Lincoln County's had way, way, way more financial money, better situation than we have for a long time.
Other questions? So Commissioner Barth, I have a text message from you that I don't quite understand. I'm not sure exactly what it is you're looking for.
Madam Chair, that was resolved earlier. I just was looking at the stuff about Munis and not looking at the list of employees that were wanted.
Perfect. Sorry that I was not paying closer attention to your text, so I'm glad we got it straightened out for you.
Also attention.
Other questions? Other people we'd like to, Commissioner Carsey, were you suggesting that you wanted Michaela Lakita to come in?
Well, not to come in, Jesse was here last week. I mean, it's hard to argue what we gained from our membership in Makita and for economic development, and, is the need there? You could always argue the need is there and present. I'm just arguing for more of an issue of fairness, I guess, that we should be contributing our fair share to the organization.
Okay. So, any other additional documents or outside agencies that people would like to hear from? We're gathering this information because we're gonna invite those folks to come tomorrow if there is anybody else that people would like to hear from.
Madam Chair, Jeff again.
Commissioner Barth.
If we can look at the numbers suggested by these different organizations and come up with our own decision without them coming in, right? I mean,
absolutely.
For example, the fair ones, I have concerns about their situation with the lack of activity. I have an interest in funding ambulance at a slightly higher level, not necessarily what they're asking, but we don't need them to come in on their knees to beg for help, do we?
No, I know. I mean, I think we did we've tried hard to plan the information that was provided today and tomorrow, but we also wanted to make sure that all the commissioners had a chance to ask for additional information if they were feeling a need for that. And so, anyway, we have made the ask, and if you guys think of something, before the, kind of close of business today where we could still get a hold of people, we will gather that information for tomorrow. And if not, then we will look for the information from the courts and we'll proceed. So, thank you. All right, so that takes us to Kim. And Kim's going to vet out a little bit more the bonding projects that we discussed briefly this morning. At least the idea of bonding we discussed this morning. So do we have slides on Dropbox for this, Kim?
Yes. Well, we'll just be referring back to the slides that were in the second PowerPoint, the other requests.
Okay, from this morning.
Right. So I just need to find that PowerPoint.
Madam Chair, it's Jeff here. I certainly have reviewed the stuff on Dropbox, but while I'm on the Zoom call, I can't go over to Dropbox myself. Now, I do have a second laptop, but at this point, have not unlimbered it today.
Well, Kim's going to pull up the slides that we're going to talk about. You should be able to see them on Zoom.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you.
What am I doing wrong to find that?
Budget hearing one, right?
Yeah, you need to.
Probably in the top one there.
Oh, here.
Yep.
Sorry. Okay.
But I don't know which one it is here.
Yeah, that you're in the agenda, so you want to go back and get. Commissioner Barth, it sounds like there's a train going by your house.
Oh, this is
I'm surprised if you're getting it from me, but I do kind of whistle tunelessly, so maybe that's what it is.
I think that's the only thing. There's only 8 items in that list, so it's not giving you a scroll bar.
Okay.
There's no more to go down to.
So, how do I get to them?
It's item 2. You want to be in item 2.
Well,
Budget view, other requests.
thank you. Yeah, this is the one, thank you.
Yeah. It's the only thing that I've been able to do today so successfully, so.
Okay. So, sorry for that delay. We're just going to revisit a little bit of what we talked about today about our outstanding debt, what our debt service costs are, and then how a bond issue would impact, what the financial impact of a bond issue would be. So I'm going to refer back to the graph I'm displaying here, the 2021 financing scenarios. And this is just showing that at the various bonding levels, we would not impact the building fund levy at all, but we would have varying amounts of additional cash available in the building fund to fund cash projects versus those projects that we would choose to bond for. And the projects that we would, coming out of the facilities task force recommendations, those projects that they recommended we consider bonding for would include the new highway facility and then the remodeling of the administrative building and extension building, just to accommodate for staff expansion in the attorney's offices primarily. Oh, and also the chillers to create some redundancy with the new jail expansion building.
Commissioner Heiberger.
So we won't make a decision on the dollar amount of those bonds until we have all the estimates in of all the different projects we want to do this time around. I'm getting a yes and a no, so.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, and I know Commissioner Karski has some thoughts on this as well, because we've talked about it briefly, but COVID put us behind on getting these numbers. And we're currently in a very good low interest rate bond environment. We have preliminary numbers, so we know in the ballpark of where we are. Okay. And I think that is why we have been tossing around the idea of a $20 million bond, is that while it might not be totally perfect, it's pretty close to where we think we're going to be with the projects that Kim itemized.
Good.
Sorry.
I was just going to add in that we do plan on, for the highway department, doing CMAR, construction manager at risk, which is what we did with the jail. Yep. And that GMP does not come in until the whole thing's been designed. And so that could be
February.
I was going to say 9 months. That's probably not that far away from there. And probably the one thing you will see us recommending, if I can speak so boldly for Kim, is that those bonds should be sold this year. So we would be doing that this year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that during building committee.
Okay.
Because we've already put Tegra under contract. We'll get the highway architect under contract in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then bringing the construction manager at risk on contract, and then starting the contract. So as we know, there's about a year's worth of bills to pay before we actually go on the ground.
Commissioner Karski.
You know, I guess a couple of things. One, Kim, I think you can answer this. If we bond, we have, 18 months to start tapping the proceeds of that money for the project? Is that the right time frame?
That sounds correct. I know we have 5 years to use it.
Spend it all.
Correct. And we can reach back 60 days for actual construction costs, and we can also reimburse ourselves for any soft costs, architects, engineers, those types of design costs leading up to the award of a construction contract.
Okay. And then, let's say we bond 20 million or pick a number, and we only end up using 18 of 20. Can we prepay that, or how does that
We
work?
would be required, we either have to use those proceeds for the intended project, or we pay those proceeds back towards the principal on the bond.
And then the third and final question, I believe, from the jail project, we bonded 40 million, whatever that meant. Yep. And we didn't obviously spend it all at once. What was the interest rate we were receiving on that money while it was, or what kind of return, if you want to equate it to an interest rate, do you know that we got on those funds?
It's just under 2%, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
We expect that over the life of that construction period, we will have earned about $1.3 million in interest on those bond proceeds.
So if we borrow you know, at 2.5%, and we get 1.9%. I mean, the value of that money, the interest rate on that money is really extremely minimal. So just a few points, I guess, I think are important for us to all realize.
There are arbitrage rules where you can't make money on what you've borrowed.
Yep.
But that's part of what our fund advisor monitors for us.
And I mean, and the interest rate environment's different than it was when we did the jail. But the point is that the money is not just, we're not burying
Not
it in
idle.
somebody's backyard. We're getting
Yeah.
return on it. So, unless it's my backyard, maybe. All right. Any other questions? Are there any other points you wanted to make on this?
No.
Okay.
And not
I mean,
unless
in
there are
my mind,
questions.
and the thing that I constantly struggle to get straight in my head is that while we call this a bond, it's, in my mind, bonds usually mean a tax increase, and that is not what we're doing here. There's already a levy in place
Correct.
for this building fund. If we don't leverage the money that we get from that levy, then we just have cash to spend right now. It's much better for the taxpayers, in my mind, to leverage it at a really low interest rate so that we can provide facilities to provide the services, to house the services that the citizens want and expect, have a right to expect from the county. So that's what we're talking about doing here.
If I may, my biggest concern is because we just don't know. I mean, we're hoping a highway department we can build for 9 to 10 million, but if it's 10 to, or if it's 11.5 million, do we not do it, or do we try to take it down, or do we try to have enough money to do it right? And that's why we hired all the people that we've hired. And I'm more concerned that we could sell ourselves short if we don't try to factor in some level of protection on the high side.
And I think we'll use our experts to get the numbers as close as we can with, with that kind of a factor for unexpected expenses or unexpected, growth in the cost of construction, so that we are as close as we can be using the expert opinions that we have, but understanding that we won't have a contract signed with a GMP or a crystal ball that tells us exactly where the magic is.
Right. And in our estimates, we are building in a 5% contingency over and above what the preliminary estimates are. So even doing that, we're still coming in overall under that $20 million level, considering all the projects that are on the table.
Other questions? Well, thank you. It's good to kind of have that in bits and pieces for my brain. It helps me to kind of marinate in it a little bit more and make sure I'm grasping it all. Okay, so that takes us to the next item, which is ambulance funding, and Carol came to the podium, so I guess, and she's talking about it.
And I realized I left my glasses over there, so I may need to dive over to go through and read those. Every year we have a discussion about ambulances as to what we go through and fund in that. So, thank you. I wanted to make sure that we made sure to draw attention to that this year also. So, with that, the last year, for 2020, you approved $53,000 for Del Rapids, Garrettson, and Humboldt. And I believe in the few years prior to that, it was at $50,000. Prior to that, you've got to go back several years, but there were higher amounts that they've got out there. When you look at the requests, you have $60,000 being requested from Del Rapids, $60,000 being requested from Garrettson, $79,500 being requested from Humboldt. We did not receive an application from
Jasper.
From Jasper. Thank you very much. I wanted to bring that up. From Jasper. And MedStar chose not to submit an application. Melinda had the conversation with him. So I guess I would throw that out for any questions, any comments, any conversations that you have about ambulance funding. If you want to have additional information,
Outside agency narratives, and so I'm in the wrong place.
So we're getting some technical assistance up here at the commission table. Is there anybody else that had any questions? I know Commissioner Barth, you commented earlier that you had some thoughts on this, but you weren't sure you needed anybody from ambulances to come in specifically and talk about it.
Right, Madam Chair, I guess I like the increase that we gave last year, and something on that same level, I think, is what we should go for again this year. I don't know the story on Humboldt at this point, and maybe we need to ask them what their special case is, but if we were to round up and go to 66,000 or 70,000, I'm sorry, where are we at now? We're at 63,000.
We're at
right?
53,000 and they've requested 60,000.
Yeah, and I'm willing to go there, but at the same time, maybe 66 is the right number, and just basically make the same increase as we did last year.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Benega.
I would like to continue the conversation we started last year, and I don't think we ever finalized, is that it seems to me that we ought to look at funding based on units of service that they're providing, rather than just a flat grant, so to speak. And then if you look at the applications, and I haven't spent a lot of time looking at it, but some other communities have supported their ambulances at different levels by a long ways. And I think that those factors ought to be put into place in the funding formula, because right now it's fairly arbitrary, and I don't agree with that. It's just a flat grant. And maybe we could do that for just the base services of opening the door for operating costs, but I don't think we're giving the communities the fair shake, if you will. If we have a community such as Garrettson, who raises a significant amount of money from the community, and then we give them the same dollar amount as we would to Humboldt or someone else. And I'm just throwing conversation out at this point, but I would really like to be basing it on some formula rather than just an arbitrary number.
And I would say that I had talked to Jason Gierman, our emergency manager, who was, who has agreed to tackle that and then got sidetracked by COVID. And so I agree with you. I mean, I would like very much for that. And honestly, I think that group, when they came together to work through some issues a year or two ago now, came back with a really good plan. So I'd like that group, and that's what Jason Gierman and I had talked about, to get together and come up with a plan to help us to see what they think would be a fair per unit of service, or, you know, measurement for funding. And but that just hasn't gotten done yet.
Understand there's also the other side of the revenue sources, with the fact, besides the community support, there's others that do a I'd say a bang-up job, that's a bad word probably, for acquiring reimbursements from Medicare and those kinds of things, because it is a diligent process that needs to happen to get those revenue sources back. We have some experience with that at the office, but I just think that sometimes we have to make sure we got our priorities right and coming down to a net unit of service on what we're gonna fund.
Right, that's why I think we kind of need the experts to help us through that a little bit, and how you calculate that. But I know that billing is a big concern, challenge for all of them.
It is.
Any other thoughts? And the problem is we're not going to get that in place by the time we have to talk through this budget. But I do agree that that's a goal. Commissioner Heiberger.
Well, we've got until the end of September for the finalized budget, so can we put some like placeholder money in there, and then just hope to have it done before September, so we can actually have it? Because I agree, it's just frustrating to throw an arbitrary number in there all the time, because you don't know if you're overfunding or you're underfunding, or, I mean, obviously they don't have enough funds, and they have the ability to go out and get ambulance districts, which we know that isn't working, I mean, as far as funding from their local areas, and that hasn't worked. But I would be would we have enough time to get it together by September to get those numbers, since that's our finalized budget, and we could put some numbers in here and figure it out in the end?
I can follow up with Jason after a meeting today to
Got
see.
a lot going on, I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it's stepped back a little bit now, but I'll follow up with him and see what time frame he thinks might be reasonable.
Okay.
All right, anything else on ambulances? Okay, so that takes us to a recap of the schedule and process. And we get Carol again with her glasses.
I didn't take them off this time. So today was your long day. I think we had a lot of good information. I was really pleased with the flow of information in the presentations that we all had. So tomorrow morning, following the commission meeting, we will start off, and that's your chance to hammer in, do a lot of deliberation and discussion, and start giving us discussion. Kim is ready to 10-key and take down changes, and by the time we get done with that, have an updated means of finances as to where we are at. Then our last meeting will be on June 30th. We go 2 weeks later, and we will do this again after the 9 a.m. commission meeting. We will talk about elected officials. We will review the means of finance, and if Kim has any other further, there's always one or two things that come up in the meantime for changes in means of finance. Final, or hopefully final, continued discussion on things such as building fund, staffing requests, equipment. I think staffing and equipment are probably the two major things for you guys to go through and have discussion about. We are not looking at the opt-out, or looking at having to meet a July 15th date, because we have opt-out available for us. And again, what you're hearing so far is a recommendation to keep it flat on there. Then we have a provisional budget. Final review would be on July 21st, with the adoption of a provisional budget July 28th, with final adoption the very last Tuesday of September.
Just that easy.
Pardon?
Just that easy.
It's that easy. And if there's additional information we can provide, please let us know. We're more than happy to do that. We recognize that these are painful things to do, and you know, whether you make the decisions now or whether you make them in September or whether you make them later on, they're tough decisions to make, no matter what the time frame is.
Commissioner Benega.
I hate to be the slow learner in this, but I'm still in my mind back at the, whatever OSI stands for, in the, or whatever I heard in the new positions, because some of the cost, base salary versus the estimated cost, is the difference between, there's a 30% pension / benefit cost, and then there's some that are 65%.
Well, Carrie's coming up. I did have the question, and for those people who may be listening by streaming, Lakita stands for Minnehaha County Economic Development Association.
Thank you.
And Lincoln County Economic Development Association.
Say that 3 times really fast.
If you want, I can provide you the spreadsheet of the calculations, but what we're doing for those is we're taking the base salary times the 2% matrix adjustment, assuming you do fund that, plus the 13.65% for OASI and SDRS, extra 2% if it's a Class B retirement, plus $15,000 for the E+1 insurance. So because that insurance rate is in there, you can see that the percentage is going to be a lot higher for a lower pay grade position. So when we're talking that pay grade 10 position, that's why it seems so large. And in a higher pay grade, it's not going to seem like nearly as much. But if you like, I can send you sort of the calculation on those.
No, I didn't know everybody got a flat dollar amount versus a percentage based on premiums.
Yep, for the insurance, it's just that $15,000. So.
That makes more sense now, but
okay.
Not say I agree with it, but it makes more sense.
Yep.
We just, and that's always an estimate, but that is the county's portion of costs for employee +1. And that's what we've always used for budgeting, so we don't want to assume the family insurance rate, because that could be way high, single could be low, so it's a good estimate.
Could you get us the numbers for, at least me, I would like to see the numbers for family +1, and whatever, single coverage?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
You bet.
You can just send it out to everybody. That'd be great.
Will do.
Thank you. Any other questions about scheduling? So tomorrow, after our regular commission meeting, we're basically going to go right into budget hearings again. Commissioner Heiberger.
Just a comment. Thank you to staff and to Jean and all you guys for doing a great job of putting this all together. Kara will attest to, I was a basket case this weekend as I was going through things until I actually got through them. And it's just really well done. And it was very, very easy to get through it. So I appreciate all the work you guys did because it was a lot.
I get no credit at all. None. So, but I agree. It is very well put together, and it really helps us to keep, our pastor this week talked about keeping the main thing, and I thought about budgeting a lot, that's really what you guys have been able to do, is help to keep us focused on the main thing by kind of taking away a lot of the extraneous detail and helping us really focus on the things that make a difference. So, in our budgeting anyway, the decisions that we have some discretion on. All right, anything else? All right, so this is our opportunity for public input. Anybody here for public input? Seeing no one rushing the podium. Apparently there's nobody out in the hall speeding down towards us. All right, so that's the end of our meeting. I'm not quite sure if I need a motion to adjourn, but I don't anticipate having any problem getting one, so I'll take one.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion and a
Jeff
second.
Jeff says bye.
All